Chapter 1503. In the outside world, Zhong An's had already surpassed many geniuses. After cultivating in the Divine Palace for 3 years, his comprehension of martial arts and the use of his talents had reached a new level. He stepped onto the 8th step of the platform. Golden primordial chi surged out in a powerful radiance as he stepped onto the 9th step. However, the pressure was even stronger now. Even though he released his cultivation to resist it, his steps became extraordinarily heavy. When he stepped onto the 10th step, sharp weapon chi suddenly swept out from the Dao platform, and it actually gave rise to a terrifying storm of weapon chi. It was like a violent dragon dancing in the sky, and its momentum was shocking. Zhong An's footsteps suddenly stopped, and his expression was extremely solemn. Is this his limit? The disciples of the various peaks watched this scene. Zhong An's released his cultivation and stepped onto the 10th step with his cultivation of the 9th level of the Emperor Realm. He wouldn't have stopped unless he was threatened. This situation was similar to Guxiu's. Guxiu had also stopped abruptly when he stepped onto the 6th step. He didn't dare to step down for a long time. Later, he condensed his primordial spirit to break through the obstruction and successfully stepped onto the 6th step. However, he was suppressed by the aura of the divine soldier and was severely injured. Zhong An's was probably the same. He must know that if he took another step forward, he would be met with the unparalleled suppression of the 12 divine soldier. If he could withstand it, he would be able to continue forward and step onto the platform. However, if he couldn't, the consequences would be even worse than Guxiu's. After all, the closer he was to the divine soldier, the more terrifying the aura of the soldier would be. Gu Kuwei and Lu Bingyan looked worried. They looked at the figure on the stone steps and didn't know whether to speak or not. The 3 demon generals had grown up together and were very close to each other. They knew Zhong An's temper very well. Even if they tried to persuade him, he wouldn't listen. Zhong An's let out a low roar, and the soul light around his body surged, incomparably intense. Then, a scythe of Origin's soul appeared, fluttering in the air like a chain. It surrounded his body, inside and out, layer after layer, wrapping his entire body inside. The Origin soul protected his body, making it impregnable. Everyone in the training hall focused on him. Next, it was time for Zhong An's to prove his ability. If he fully released his cultivation and gathered his primordial spirit, would he be able to break through the 11th step? If he succeeded, he would step onto the platform and stand in front of the divine soldier. If he failed, he would have to pay a price. Go, said Zhong An's resolutely. He pointed his finger forward, and the Philian chains wrapped around his body shot forward like a wild python. A sharp beam of light slashed through the air, as if slicing the air in two. There was a loud crashing sound as it slashed towards the storm on the platform. The storm let out a thunderous roar like a raging dragon. Streams of divine soldier shot out from 12 directions and converged within, causing the storm's body to become increasingly majestic and domineering. The entire training ground trembled as a result. The disciples of the 7 peaks looked on in shock. They felt that the divine soldier's aura was everywhere in the dojo, as though it was resonating with the heavens and earth. Even though they were far away, they could still feel a faint prickling pain on their skin. In the next moment, a blinding light exploded. The flying scythe slashed through the storm, emitting intense sounds of friction. Dazzling sparks flew everywhere as Zhong An's continuously poured his soul force into the scythe. He wanted to slice apart the storm and break through the obstruction. However, the soldier aura that converged into the storm intensified. The storm crushed the flying scythe, pushing it back inch by inch as though it was mocking it. Gradually, it closed in on Zhong An's. Finally, with a loud boom, soul light scattered in all directions. The essence soul flying scythe was reduced to nothingness as a terrifying shockwave spewed out like a tsunami towards Zhong An's chest. With a cry, Zhong An spat out a mouthful of blood. The color in his face drained as he retreated 2 steps back from the 10th step to the 8th step. However, after taking 2 steps, he immediately stabilized himself. Impressive. Gushio praised with a look of astonishment. Although he had failed in the challenge, his opponent had nearly reached the 11th step. Furthermore, Zhong An's had not been sent flying by the soldier aura's recoil. He had only taken 2 steps back before stabilizing himself. His cultivation level was a lot higher than Gushio's. It's indeed impressive, Qinyan said. Zhong An's realm was indeed higher than Gushio's, but it was limited. Standing on the Dao platform and withstanding the baptism of 12 soldier auras was not just a test of one's realm. It was also a test of one's martial will. Zhong An's Dao was clearly deeper than Gushio's. Even so, he still lost. Little Nine said. In the battle at the Tsang Prefecture, they had experienced Zhong An's ability. He was considered a respectable opponent, but he had only managed to reach the 10th step. From this, it could be seen that only personal disciples could attempt the 12 divine soldier items. If second and third class disciples tried, they would only be asking for trouble. This point had become common knowledge among the 7 Peaks disciples. Du Jun and Gushio had failed one after another. Zhong An's talent was nearly at the level of a first-class disciple, but he still could not escape his fate of failure. This made many people realize that the divine soldier was not something they were qualified to vie for. Little Zhong, are you all right? Gu Kuei ran over and helped Zhong An's off the stage. It's just a slight shock. It's fine. In fact, I was only probing and did not use all my strength. But from the looks of it, even if I used all my strength, I would only be able to reach the 12th step. I wouldn't even be able to reach the divine soldier, much less obtain the divine soldier's recognition. Zhong An's tone was filled with bitterness. What he said was the truth. If he had used all his strength, there was an 80% chance he could have destroyed the storm. But what could he do? It was just taking 2 more steps to obtain the divine soldier's recognition. In the end, it was meaningless. Is it really that strong? Gu Kuei asked. He knew very well that both of them had comprehended a trace of the laws. Zhong An's use of the laws just now could definitely break the storm. There was no doubt about this. It might be stronger than you think. Zhong An's patted Gu Kuei's broad shoulder and walked back to Mizang Hall's team helplessly. It wasn't just strong. It was unfathomable. After experiencing it personally, Zhong An's had a hunch that the 12 pieces of the divine soldier weren't something that an Emperor Realm cultivator could touch. One had to be at least in the Arch Realm. Moreover, only Emperor Yuan, whose nomological power was almost perfect, could complete the 12th step and reach the divine soldier to make the divine soldier appear. As for whether he could obtain the divine soldier's recognition, it was hard to estimate. Thinking of this, Zhong An's, who had returned to the team, glanced in the direction of Mo Xian. He was afraid that this time, it would be difficult for His Highness Mo Xian to obtain the divine soldier's recognition. Mo Xian was currently in the half-step Arch realm and had touched the nomological power. At his age and cultivation level, he could be considered a super genius in the outside world. But if he wanted to conquer the divine soldier, he was still lacking a lot. This wasn't a look down on Mo Xian, but it was the truth. Even Zhong An's was very unwilling. Perhaps only the first princess of the East Continent, Qingji Han, was qualified to compete. Zhang Yi, how about you go with me? At this time, Haisha looked at Zhang Yi, his eyes surging with fighting spirit. There was no hope for the second-class and third-class disciples. If they wanted to obtain the divine soldier, it would depend on the direct disciples of the various peaks. Okay, Zhang Yi nodded. Then, 2 brave figures stepped out of Mizang Hall's team. These 2 figures could be called the hope of Mizang Hall. If they also failed, it would mean that Mizang Hall was wiped out. Count me in, a voice sounded. Yi Shuihan stepped out of Daozong Peak's team. I'll go too. Feng Qinli followed closely. When he passed by Shou Wuk, he deliberately glanced at him. Then, the 4 figures walked side by side toward the divine soldier platform. Zhang Yi and Haisha, direct disciples of Mizang Hall. Yi Shuihan and Feng Qinli, direct disciples of Daozong Peak. These 4 people were all extraordinary and had a strong foundation. Haisha was born on an island overseas. He was a descendant of the Golden Giant Ape and a member of the Beast Arch clan. Zhang Yi one of the 4 divine generals of Daqin under Qin Hao. He was a descendant of Zhang Lang. Feng Qianli, the successor of the Zhuiying Sword the Arch in the East Continent. Yi Shuihan, the son of the Western Liang Luo Shui Emperor. Yi Long Yuan had been unable to step into the Arch realm because of the lack of resources. However, the Yi clan had also produced several emperors in the past. Their foundation was not inferior to the other 3. Now, the 4 first-class geniuses of the Divine Palace were walking side by side to challenge the Divine Soldier together. It was extremely exciting and made the disciples of the 7 Peaks feel excited. Senior Brother Hai Sha, Senior Brother Zhang Yi, do your best. Bring back 2 Divine Soldier items from Zhang Hall. Senior Brother Yi, don't lose to them. The disciples of the 2 Peaks cheered each other on. The atmosphere in the training hall instantly rose. Mizang Daozong, what do you think? Above the void, Migra smiled and asked the 2 Peak Masters. Finally, a direct disciple made a move. Success or failure is not important. The spirit of fighting for one's ideals and the burning will to fight is the philosophy of Mizang Peak. It is enough to see them fighting for their ideals, Mizang Zhan said. Whether or not they could obtain the Divine Soldier was not their goal. They just wanted to see how much Hai Sha and Zhang Yi had improved. Mizang Zhan's words were very righteous, but it was not difficult to tell that he did not have much confidence in Zhang Yi and Hai Sha. The old man Daozong smiled and said, "Fortunately, I have many disciples under me, including Little Han and Wuk. Perfected cultivator Yun Yi, perfected cultivator Tai Wei, and perfected cultivator Yao Guang all looked at him, speechless. He obviously did not have high hopes for Yi Shuihan and Feng Qianli. However, the 2 of them were not the most outstanding people of Daozong Peak. Yi Shuihan is a good friend of yours." Eastern Sky asked Qin Hao. Yes. Qin Hao nodded. We are good brothers who have gone through fire and water together. Zhang Yi and Hai Sha are also my friends. How far do you think they can go? Eastern Sky smiled. Well, Qin Hao glanced at Zhang Xiong and Sheng Hua, then said with a straight face, success or failure is not important. The disciples of the Divine Palace should go in bravely and not be afraid of difficulties. You really know how to talk, kid. Haha. Zhang Xiong was so happy that he raised his big fan-like palm and was about to slap him, but Qin Hao dodged first. Who would be able to withstand this slap? Junior Brother Qin, come to Daozong Peak for tea when you have time. I have a supreme grade Qi Luo immortal tea for myself. Shenghua laughed. Of course, of course. Qin Hao nodded and turned around. The entire Divine Palace knew that Shenghua loved tea. The supreme grade Qi Luo immortal tea was indeed a rare good tea that helped to nourish vitality. Smooth talker. Eastern Sky scolded jokingly and avoided the topic. However, Qin Hao also knew that the 4 people in the training hall had a slim chance of winning the Divine Soldier. At this moment, Yi Shuihan and the other 3 stepped on the stairs at the same time. Golden light surged from their bodies, which was extremely spectacular and dazzling. Of course, there was a big difference in aura between 1 person and 4 people at the same time. What's more, these 4 people were all direct disciples of the Peak Master. However, the situation on the platform had also changed dramatically from when Guxiu and Zhong Ans had challenged before. The raging soldier qi in the air disappeared. Instead, for extremely powerful auras came from the 4 treasure chests and blasted towards the 4 people like lightning. One was mixed with blue water light, one was bursting with sword shadows, and the other 2 were domineering saber radiance and fist radiance. They attacked the 4 people with terrifying power. The soldier aura has attributes. Qin Hao looked at the situation on the platform, and his eyes became more serious. Chapter 1504. At this time, the 4 of them walked side by side and stepped onto the stone steps at the same time. However, they were not going in the same direction. Zhang Yi stepped onto the 3rd Divine Soldier. Si Sand was the 4th, Feng Qianli the 7th, and Yi Shuihan went to the 11th Divine Soldier. Everyone's goal was clear. They were attracted, and what responded to them was the attack power of the 4 Divine Soldier treasure chests. It seems that what the divine soldier emitted before was only the power of the soldiers, not the power of the origin. Qin Hao saw the truth. The pressure that Yi Shuihan and the others were facing now was the true power of the divine soldier. As for Du Jun, Gu Xiu, and Zhong An's, they were only pushed back by the power of the soldiers. Whoosh! The overbearing blade light in front of them slashed down violently. Zhang Ye's eyes were cold, and his body was surrounded by surging blade aura. The giant blade on his back shook and released a sharp light. It was like a long blade cutting through the sky, shattering the blade light in front of him. His expression did not change as he walked forward steadily. San punched out, and his fist spat out turbulent power. Everything in front of him was destroyed, and he continued to move forward. Feng Qianli did not stop, and also disintegrated the sword aura. However, Yi Shuihan was a little different. He did not make a move, but the water light rushed over and entered his body. It was as if he had absorbed it and dissolved it into nothingness. His walking speed was not slower than the three of them. For a time, the disciples of the peaks trembled. It was indeed different when a direct disciple made a move. Although the four of them challenged at the same time, the pressure of the divine soldier did not weaken. Instead, it stimulated its attributes and became stronger. Qin Hao could see the change, and the people present were not fools. To be able to become a disciple of the divine palace and overcome many obstacles, they themselves were extraordinary talents. At this moment, the blade light on the platform whistled, and the fist aura was astonishing. Waves of power continued to bombard. The whole square roared, and the power became more and more violent and terrifying. But the four of them pressed forward and broke through the obstacles one after another. In an instant, they all came to the place where Zhong An's had been before, the 10th step of the platform. At this time, the power of the divine soldier was even more violent. A beam of blade aura shot up into the sky and tore through the clouds. It was as if the giant blade of the god of war had appeared, warning the world not to take even half a step forward. In front of the sea of sand, a primitive ancient fist was born. It condensed into a huge fist shadow that enveloped the void. Its power seemed to be able to shatter everything. A terrifying sword diagram appeared in front of Feng Qianli. Within the sword diagram, a peerless sharp sword flashed with a dazzling light. After that, a second sword appeared, a third sword, a fourth sword appeared in an unending stream. The number of swords was innumerable. They lined up together, blocking the path of the sword calamity. Every sharp sword contained a tyrannical killing power, causing people to tremble in fear. Roar! The deep sea roared, and a majestic sound was deafening. Layers of giant waves surged towards the horizon, covering the sky. A total of 36 layers of giant waves overlapped, blocking in front of Yi Shuihan. Standing in front of these incomparably majestic giant waves, his figure seemed incomparably small, as if he was about to be swallowed by the giant waves of the deep sea. In an instant, all the disciples in the training hall felt suffocated, and the atmosphere froze. This power, even watching from afar, they felt their hearts palpitating. Could it be that Zhong An's was repelled by this power? Now, Zhang Yi, Sand, and the other two were also facing this destructive power. It was unknown if they could break through it. After all, the four of them were genuine disciples that had received the sincere recognition of the Seven Peaks Peak Masters. In terms of talent and potential, they were definitely stronger than Zhong An's. The 11th step of the Tao platform seemed to have become a barrier that the disciples could not cross. Zhong An's was forcefully suppressed. Could Sand and the others succeed? Roar! A deep roar resounded. Zhang Yi made the first move. His soul power exploded, and an incomparably tyrannical sword chi revolved around his body. It was as if there were tens of thousands of sword chi flashing. Then, the tens of thousands of sword chi merged into one, and a soaring sword chi soared into the sky, splitting the clouds. It towered above the 9 heavens, and its height was comparable to the sword chi released by the divine soldier. Break! Zhang Yi raised his arm and pointed forward. With a swoosh, the condensed sword qi slashed down. A sharp light pierced through the sky and landed on the war god's giant blade. The war god's giant blade was also extraordinarily tyrannical. The sword qi roared in the air, and it also slashed toward Zhang Yi. At this moment, the two sword qi collided, and an ear-piercing tearing sound was heard. Thunder rumbled in the sky. This sword qi slashed out a thunder tribulation. Everyone stared up in shock. Lightning rumbled in the sky, as though two true dragons were engaged in a bloody battle, with only one side remaining. Countless rays of blinding light flashed as they collided countless times. After that, a thunderous shattering sound echoed through the heavens as the war god's blade shattered into pieces, vanishing into nothingness. In the sky, only Zhang Yi's sword qi was left. It's done. The disciples of Mizang Hall were incomparably excited. Their blood was boiling, and the blood from the soles of their feet gushed up to their heads. The barrier that Zhong and could not break was broken by Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi did not even pull out the weapon on his back. Just his sword qi alone was enough to crush the divine soldier. Zhang Yi was indeed one of the most outstanding disciples of Mizang Hall. Dong! In the next second, Zhang Yi stepped forward. He steadily crossed the 11th step and stepped onto the 12th step. At this point, he was completely standing on the platform. He was only a few steps away from the divine soldier, who was emitting sword qi. Finally, there's someone who can catch my eye. The Xiantian, celestial lord, smiled. Enduring the divine soldier's sword qi and successfully stepping onto the platform was enough to prove that this person was extraordinary. But that was all. Roar! A giant ape roared. In the next second, everyone felt as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. The platform was shaking. Sisan punched out a dazzling golden fist aura that seemed to have solidified. It was like a real fist, and it forcefully penetrated the divine soldier's ancient god fist shadow. The fist shadow shattered, and the sword qi disappeared. Then, Sisan crossed the 11th step and stepped onto the platform, standing side by side with Zhang Yi. The second one. The hearts of his 7 peaks disciples trembled. Sisan had also succeeded. Swoosh! Swoosh! Countless sword shadows flew out at a speed too fast for the eyes to take in. When they reached Feng Qianli's body, tens of thousands of sword qi gushed out and attacked the sword diagram. At the same time, the peerless swords contained in the sword diagram counterattacked. In an instant, countless sword qi rushed back and forth. It was unknown how many times the two sides had clashed. In the end, the sword diagram was penetrated by sword qi and collapsed. The sword tribulation that blocked Feng Qianli disappeared, and he also stepped onto the platform. But compared to Zhang Yi and Sisan, Feng Qianli's clothes were torn in several places. There were holes that looked like they were pierced by swords. Obviously, he didn't block all the attacks of the sword diagram. Even so, he had succeeded. It was enough to be proud of. Shouwuk, you have no chance. Stepping onto the platform, Feng Qianli stood proudly. He turned around and stared at Shouwuk of the Daozong Peak with a pair of sharp eyes. He raised his chin high. Vulgar. Shouwuk was disdainful. Boom! Just then, there was an earth-shattering sound of a tsunami. It was as if a huge wave had crashed onto the ground. Everyone couldn't stand still, and their bodies swayed. Then, everyone quickly looked towards Yishuihan. For people had challenged at the same time, and 3 had succeeded. The last attack was naturally caused by Yishuihan. However, after looking over, everyone's hearts sank. They saw that Yishuihan had completely disappeared from the platform. There were only 36 huge waves that swept over one after another. It was as if Yishuihan had been swallowed up. Was this a failure? Even if he was a direct disciple, not all of them were qualified to succeed. Chapter 1505. There were strong and weak personal disciples as well. For example, the second and third-rate disciples of each peak had their own strengths and weaknesses. Yishuihan was obviously weaker than Sisan and Zhang Yi. However, the fact that they were ranked as personal disciples proved that their talents and potential weren't too far apart. Perhaps Yishuahan's failure was due to his cultivation level. After all, he was 8th level Emperor Realm, a level behind Sea Sand and Zhang Yi. Zhong An's was 9th level Emperor Realm, yet he'd been stopped by a 10th level cultivator. It wasn't embarrassing even if Yishuahan didn't succeed. Aren't you nervous that Yishuahan has failed? Eastern Sky looked at Qin Hao. Isn't that normal? Qin Hao replied with a smile. Had he really failed? As the son of Emperor Dragon Abyss and the crown prince of the Luo Shui Empire, Yishuahan was far more capable than this. A deafening roar erupted. Just when everyone thought that Yishuahan had failed the challenge, they saw a black vortex appear in the huge waves that were crashing down. It spun crazily, and the huge waves suddenly turned into a water storm. They were stirred up and crazily rushed towards the center of the vortex. The vortex was like a black hole that could devour everything. It gradually absorbed the majestic waves until all 36 waves were sucked into it. Then, a figure appeared on the 10th stone step. He wore long blue robes, his black hair fluttering in the wind, and was surrounded by an azure light. He looked like the emperor of a kingdom of water. It was Yishuahan. He'd refined all 36 giant waves and absorbed all of their might. He'd succeeded as well. Is it a surprise that I'm doing it for everyone's enjoyment? Yishuahan turned around and smiled frivolously at the disciples of the 7 peaks below. He lifted his foot and crossed the 11th step, standing on the level of the platform. Once again, he stood shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Boom! The 7 peaks disciples' minds shook. Yishuahan was 8th level Emperor Realm, but he'd broken through the Divine Soldier's pressure that even Zhong An's hadn't been able to. They'd all thought that he'd failed. But in the end, his personal disciple's talent was indeed very strong. Within Mizar Hall's group, Zhong An's eyes narrowed slightly, but his state of mind quickly returned to normal. If he were to give it his all, he would be able to cross the 11th step and stand on the platform. But that wouldn't make the Divine Soldier recognize him as his master. It would be meaningless. Why bother? Therefore, he did not feel that it was unfair. He could also do what Yishuahan did. That being said, Yishuahan was still a level lower than him. They were both 8th level Emperor Realm cultivators, but Gu Xiao had only reached the 6th level. Now that Yishuahan was standing on the stage, it was enough to prove his talent. It is indeed quite normal. Eastern Sky smiled. Qin Hao seemed to have a very good understanding of Yishuahan. He already knew that Yishuahan would not stop at the 10th step. But after that, it would be considered a real challenge. He would gain the recognition of the Divine Soldier and become the master of the Divine Soldier. This was an extraordinarily difficult task. Qin Hao also withdrew his smile and put on a solemn expression. He looked at the 4 figures on the platform with some worry. It wasn't surprising that Sea Sand, Zhang Yi, and Yishuahan had stepped onto the platform, but it would be very difficult to make the Divine Soldier submit. Do your best. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you hold back, you will miss out on the opportunity to obtain the Divine Soldier. The profound heaven immortal Lord sternly warned the 4. The 4 nodded in unison. They knew what to do the moment they stood on the platform. At this moment, over 1,000 gazes were fixed on the platform. After crossing the 12th step, someone finally stood in front of the Divine Soldier. No one knew if Sea Sand and the others would be recognized and return with the greatest artifact of the Divine Palace. If they could obtain the Divine Soldier, it would not only symbolize Mizar Hall's glory, it would also be a great improvement for them. With an Emperor weapon in hand, how many Emperor weapons were there in the world? There were very few blacksmiths in the outside world, and the number of almighty artifact emperors could be counted on one hand. If Sea Sand and the others returned to the outside world with the peerless Emperor weapon forged by Xintian Peak, who would dare to compete with Emperor Yuan? The disciples of the 7 peaks fantasized, and they became quite excited. It was as if they were about to obtain the Divine Soldier. On the platform, after the profound heaven immortal Lord finished speaking, he retreated to the side, completely giving up the platform for the 4 to fight to their heart's content. At this time, the aura of Zhang Yi and the others rose to the extreme. Bright golden light shone, and the surging vitality was mixed with incomparably powerful soul power. Sea Sand even transformed into the original form of a golden ape, a demonic beast. His huge body stepped on the platform, and his aura was incomparably violent. Whether they could obtain the divine soldier or not would depend on this attack. Buzz. It was still Zhang Yi who made the first move. Among the raging golden light, there were wisps of platinum color. Terrifying saber intent spread out, and his tyrannical will swept through the world, filled with domineering, killing intent. All the disciples could clearly feel the terrifying saber might in Zhang Ye's will. It was as if a martial artist holding a domineering saber appeared in everyone's mind, as if he could destroy everyone's soul. So strong. Gu Xiu clenched his fists. After returning from the illusory palace, he hadn't had the chance to ask Zhang Yi for advice. From this scene, the other party's killing saber intent was even more violent. This terrifying will could directly destroy the opponent's soul. It turned out that unknowingly, Zhang Ye's ability had already reached such a level. He had comprehended the laws and was half a step into the Arch realm. I've embarrassed the Qin family. Qin Yun smiled bitterly and shook his head. The people around Qin Hao were each stronger than the other. Back then, on the Broken Dragon Cliff, Qin Hao still needed his protection. Now, even the people around him had surpassed Qin Yun by a lot. He was gradually unable to keep up. Hearing this, Aku held Qin Yun's hand tightly and smiled slightly. Qin Yun wasn't the only one who couldn't keep up. Wasn't she also left behind? Thinking back to the scene of fighting with Qin Hao in the wasteland, Aku missed it. At that time, she could still exchange a few moves with Qin Hao. But now, she might not even be able to block a single move. After all, Zhang Yi was so strong that he was half a step into the Arch realm. It was just that she didn't know how much stronger Qin Hao was compared to Zhang Yi. This made Aku look forward to his performance. As for challenging the Divine Soldier platform, there was no need for her to compete with Qin Yun. Buzz. On the platform, the raging saber intent soared again. It was incomparably domineering. It was as if Zhang Ye's entire body had turned into a blazing white saber light as he approached the Divine Soldier step by step. That earth-shattering saber intent also shrouded the Divine Soldier treasure chest. It was as if his will had already penetrated it, wanting to crush the Divine Soldier's spirit and conquer it. And in Zhang Ye's consciousness, everything around him had disappeared. It was as if he was in a vast and boundless world. In this world, a peerless divine saber stood upright in the sky, exuding a peerless saber might that wanted to slash the heavens. Above the divine saber, endless saber intent filled the air like a tidal wave. Strands of saber light shot out and slashed toward Zhang Yi, incomparably ferocious. 9 heavens consecutive slash. Zhang Yi roared. His saber soul appeared and was held in his palm. He stepped into the sky and flew across the sky like a saber god, rushing towards the endless sea of saber light in the void. His momentum was unstoppable. Chapter 1506. The divine saber was unrivaled in the world, emitting a sharp sound. Strands of white saber chi slashed out with ear-piercing whistles, weaving into a dense sea of saber chi that swallowed Zhang Ye's entire being. In this world of saber, only saber light, saber chi, and saber were left. The great path was also dominated by the way of the saber. Facing the saber chi that filled the sky, Zhang Yi stepped into the air like an invincible saber god. His aura was unstoppable. He held the saber soul in his hand and slashed out a powerful saber light. The saber light tore forward, cutting through everything. It cut a path through the saber chi in the sky. Then, he slashed a second time, a third time, and a fourth time. Each slash was stronger and fiercer than the last. Every slash seemed to overlap with the previous one, and the power became more and more terrifying. It was the strongest sword technique of the Zhang clan, the 9 heaven consecutive slashes. No matter how powerful the divine saber was, Zhang Yi continued forward. Terrifying saber power erupted from his body, resonating with the great path of heaven and earth. At this moment, his aura reached its peak. After the ninth slash, he was already in front of the divine saber, as if he could reach out and grab it. However, at this moment, the divine saber that stood in the sky exploded with even more terrifying power. The world lost its balance, and the sound of the void collapsing was deafening. It was as if the saber power was going to crush the heavens. The divine saber's divine light disappeared, and the blade gradually turned black. Boundless demonic chi circled around it, emitting demonic power. It was as if it had turned into the saber of a demon god that had slaughtered billions of spirits. Boom! The power of rules exploded. Zhang Yi knew very well that the divine soldier he was facing now was its original appearance. It was also the most powerful moment. Whether he could subdue it or not, success or failure depended on this move. At this moment, Zhang Yi seemed to have turned into a saber and merged with the saber soul. The terrifying power of rules exploded, and he slashed down for the last time. The 10th slash. This was also the 10th slash that he had created in the year of the illusory palace. After experiencing several life and death situations, he had broken his own limits. Its power was far from what the 9 heaven consecutive slashes could compare to. Then this slash that could destroy everything slashed down on the demonic saber. On the Dao platform, everyone saw Zhang Yi approaching the divine soldier step by step. The saber intent around him became increasingly turbulent. Clearly, he had already entered a battle of his consciousness. With every step he took, a crack would appear on the divine soldier treasure chest. Gradually, more and more cracks appeared, densely packed together. It was as though it had suffered countless slashes from Zhang Yi and was about to disintegrate, revealing the true form of the divine soldier. Seeing this scene, the disciples of Mizar Hall became especially excited. They didn't know what kind of shocking divine soldier would appear after the chest was broken. The others on the stage were not idle either. Si Sand, Feng Qianli, and Yi Shuihan also approached the divine soldier step by step. They were also caught in the battle of their consciousnesses. However, compared to Yi Shuihan, Ocean Sand erupted with a monstrous fist intent. Feng Qianli seemed to transform into a sword, and Yi Shuihan's body was covered in a faint layer of water armor, as if a stormy sea was about to burst out. The martial wills that each of them released were different. But no matter who it was, at this moment, their auras had reached the extreme and resonated with the great Tao. It was as if they themselves were the Tao. More and more cracks appeared on the 4 treasure chests floating on the stage. They were about to be unable to withstand the pressure of the 4 people's wills and were about to shatter. Crash! Finally, the first shattering sound that everyone had been waiting for rang out in the Dao platform. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. It was Zhang Yi. In front of Zhang Yi, the treasure chest turned into fragments, as if it had been destroyed by the domineering saber intent. Crash! Before everyone could be surprised, the second shattering sound rang out. It was sea sand. Then, the third shattering sound also rang out on the Dao platform. Powerful. Personal disciples are indeed different. He's really too powerful. The disciples of the 7 peaks exclaimed in shock. They had actually shattered the treasure chest and caused the divine soldier to reveal his true form. However, the moment the treasure chest shattered, a dazzling light appeared on the stage, as if it was going to blind everyone's eyes. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu couldn't withstand it, and neither could releasing Dilly. They closed their eyes one after another until a surging saber intent whizzed past in front of them. The disciples of lower realms slid back far away and felt that the light on the stage had dimmed. Only then did they open their eyes again and look towards the Dao platform. In the next second, the entire place was shocked and shrieked. The peerless divine soldier that they had imagined did not appear. Instead, what was floating in front of Zhang Yi was actually a set of armor that was surrounded by demonic chi. The armor floated in mid-air like a living demonic god sitting on a throne, exuding a terrifying demonic intent that made people feel intimidated. On the other side of Haisha was another set of armor. From within the armor, the roar of a lion emperor could be heard, shocking everyone. It was also shaped like a lion king, roaring at the sky. The armor in front of Yishuehan was in the shape of a human, like the goddess of dawn. It raised its hands high, holding a bottle in its palms. Although the three sets of armor had different appearances, they all shone with a golden light and exuded a terrifying emperor's might as if they were alive. In front of Feng Qianli, the divine soldier chest that he had challenged was not opened. The cracks on the chest gradually healed and finally returned to its original state. In the next moment, an extremely sharp sword intent flashed out of the chest and penetrated Feng Qianli's chest. He was sent flying and fell to the ground from the Dao platform. His hair was messy, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. But no one cared about Feng Qianli's sorry state. At this moment, all eyes were focused on the Dao platform, staring at the three sets of armor. Was this the peerless divine soldier that Xiantian Peak had spent 700 years and overcome many difficulties to create? It was a combination of attack, defense, amplification, and life-saving. Its power surpassed all the weapons in the history of the Divine Palace. The shape of the weapons was really beyond the disciples' expectations. With the appearance of the divine soldier, the disciples of the Seven Peaks were full of praise. Many people did not expect it to be armor. However, the people who were more surprised were Qin Hao, Zheng Qingqi, Xiaogua, and many of the disciples of the Xinyuan family who had participated in the Battle of Feng City. This included Ning Tianxing, the crown prince of Ningwu. How can this be? Ning Tianxing was stunned. The style, shape, and aura of this armor were 80% similar to the armor worn by Qin Hao during the Battle of Golden Light City and Feng City. The only difference was the color. The three items floating on the Dao platform were golden. Qin Hao's armor was silver, and Ning Tianxing sensed that it was not the original appearance of the armor. It was a bit like its power was suppressed. If Qin Hao's armor had not been sealed, it would most likely be dazzling golden. Xiaogua's eyes widened, and he stared at the Dao platform. His hands covered his mouth tightly, and his heart beat violently. This armor was similar to his Taurus Saint garment, but the Taurus Saint garment was given to him by Qin Hao. How could this be? Qin Hao was similarly dumbfounded. He quickly probed his interspatial ring with his mind. If not for the fact that the 12 Zodiac Saint garments were still in the ring, he would have found it unbelievable. He would have thought that his Saint garments had run off the stage. He had narrowly escaped death in the Hidden Dragon's secret realm. He had almost lost his life to obtain this treasure. It was the last masterpiece left by Li Wanji's master, Empress Xiantian, before she died. Empress Xiantian? Boom! Qin Hao's mind shook violently, and his soul almost shook out of his body. A thought that he did not even dare to think about flashed through his consciousness. Could it be that Empress Xiantian was... Drip! A drop of tear quietly fell from the corner of his eye. He looked at the handsome eldest senior brother beside him. This was a great emperor of the Nirvana realm, an unprecedented talent of the generation of outstanding disciples in the Divine Palace for thousands of years. Not bad. You actually broke the treasure chest and made the divine soldier appear. Hey, junior brother, what's wrong with you? Eastern Sky noticed that Qin Hao was different. The wind is too strong. It's blinding. Qin Hao forced a smile and flicked the tear from the corner of his eye. I know they are brothers you care about, but you don't have to be so pretentious. Eastern Sky rubbed the back of Qin Hao's head. Feeling the warm palm, Qin Hao's heart was very sad. Brothers I care about? Eldest senior brother, you too. He collected his thoughts and suppressed his emotions with his martial will, forcing himself to calm down. Even if he knew everything, Qin Hao could not say anything. After all, there were still many mysteries that had not been solved. Moreover, this was the Fire Beacon Festival, and all the disciples of the Seven Peaks were present. To be able to do this, the Peak Master of the Seven Peaks did not take you as his personal disciples in vain. It's a pity that your cultivation is still lacking. At this moment, the Xiantian deity Lord laughed. She had originally thought that Zhang Yi and the others would not be able to make the divine soldier appear, but they had done it. It was worth encouraging. The disciples below looked at each other, puzzled. Why did the Xiantian Peak say this? Could it be that Zhang Yi and Hai Sha had also failed the challenge and failed to make the divine soldier recognize them as its master? The truth was as everyone thought. We have learned our lesson. Zhang Yi and the other two bowed to the Shantian deity lord. Although they were very reluctant, they had no choice but to turn around and step down. When they turned around, the disciples discovered to their shock that an enormous wound had appeared on Zhang Yi's chest. His clothes had been cut in half, and the lower half was rolled up to his waist. Judging from the wound, it was obviously a blade mark. This proved that he had lost the battle of consciousness. He hadn't defeated the artifact spirit and failed to gain the divine soldier's recognition. It was the same for Hai Sha. His chest was imprinted with layer upon layer of fist marks. Just looking at the densely packed imprints made one feel even more uncomfortable, as if they had been punched themselves. Who knew how many punches he had endured? Yishuehan, on the other hand, was all smiles. There was not the slightest hint of dejection from his failure. It was as if he had benefited from it. As for Feng Qianli, it was only now that the crowd saw the Zhuiying Sword Emperor's successor sprawled on the ground, covered in sword marks all over his body. This fellow hadn't even managed to make his weapon appear. It was truly, "Boss, I've broken through to 9th level Emperor realm and grasped the embryonic form of the power of laws." Yishuehan transmitted his voice to Qin Hao when he stepped off the stage with a pleased expression on his face. It was true that he had failed, but the pressure of the Aquarius armor had allowed him to break through his limits and unexpectedly break through to the next level. He had even used the artifact spirit's arts to form his own law of laws, greatly increasing his cultivation. His next step was to break through to Great Emperor realm. The reason he had failed just now was because his cultivation was insufficient. After all, that was an emperor's weapon, and the artifact spirit was too strong. If Yishuehan could do it all over again, he would have a 90% chance of defeating the artifact spirit and gaining the divine soldier's recognition when he fully grasped the power of laws. It was the same for Zhang Yi and Hai Sha. They had lost because their cultivation was suppressed. Congratulations. Qin Hao transmitted his voice. He didn't have much of a reaction. His thoughts were too heavy, and there was even a trace of pain spreading from the depths of his heart. However, he concealed it so well that no one noticed. Yishuehan glanced at Qin Hao a few more times. As brothers who had advanced hand in hand, he could more or less see that Qin Hao's mood was a bit different. As for why his boss was like this, he would ask him after the event. However, the disciples of the Seven Peaks weren't calm. They had never imagined that Hai Sha and Zhang Yi would also fail their challenge. These four personal disciples had crushed their way all the way to the Tao platform. Their martial wills were so strong that they had even destroyed the divine soldier's treasure chest. Even so, they had still lost to the divine soldier. Half-step Yuan Emperor, comprehending the power of laws, had failed. Who else could gain the divine soldier's recognition? Chapter 1507. Chan Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The battle of the princesses. The four personal disciples had failed in their challenge. This was a huge blow to everyone. After all, Zhang Yi and Hai Sha's talents were rare even among the personal disciples of the Seven Peaks. Even though they stepped onto the platform and shattered the weapon boxes, they could not gain the divine soldier's approval. The emperor weapon forged by the Shantian immortal lord was too powerful. No one could make the divine soldier recognize them as its master. Sighs could be heard in the training hall. Shantian Peak had organized the Fire Beacon Festival, and all the disciples of the Seven Peaks had come. Were they all going to return empty-handed? This would make the seniors of the previous generation laugh at them and make the new generation look incompetent. Half-step Great Emperor, comprehending the rules, still can't make the divine soldier submit. It's just as I expected. Zhong Ens looked at Mo Xian. Zhang Yi and Hai Sha's abilities were not any weaker than His Highness. This proved that even if Mo Xian went, he would not be much stronger. How ironic. The Emperor weapon was right in front of them, and anyone could take it. But no one was qualified to take the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace. Even if you go, your performance may not be as good as mine. Feng Qianli, whose hair was disheveled, returned to Daozong Peak's ranks. When he passed by Head Wuk, he spoke coldly, as if the sword holes all over his body were Head Wuk's end. You can still bear it. Zhou Wudao smiled. No. Zhou Wuk stepped out. Sword will bloomed around him as he left the group and headed for the platform. He did not care about a personal battle, but he had the glory of the Sword Emperor of the southern region. He came from a sword sect and was known as Wuk. How could he allow Feng Qianli to slander him? He wanted to challenge and prove the sword sect's swordsmanship. I'll go with you. Zhou Wudao stepped out at the same time. His strong and domineering aura spread out, shocking the disciples of Daozong Peak. Finally, they had made their move. Although Yi Shuihan and Feng Qianli's defeat in the challenge had dampened the confidence of many Daozong Peak disciples, the two of them were not the most outstanding talents of their peak. In comparison, Zhou Wuk and Zhou Wudao had deeper cultivation and stronger strength. Perhaps they could defeat the artifact spirit and make the divine soldier recognize them as its master. The two of them walked side by side towards the platform. The pressure from the platform could not stop them in the slightest. The situation was completely different from when Du Jun and Gu Xiu challenged each other. In terms of aura, even Zhang Yi and Si San were slightly inferior. In fact, Zhou Wudao wanted to be with Qin Hao the most. However, he saw that Qin Hao had no intention of making a move. Presumably, he wanted to wait until everyone had tried before he was willing to make a move. What a proud fellow. Zhou Wudao was a little speechless. In the past, he had often done this. If he encountered any difficulties, he would wait for everyone to try before he was willing to take action. It was not that he was putting on airs, but that he was confident in his own strength, proving that he could do things that others could not. However, ever since he met Qin Hao, it seemed that his pride had gradually abandoned him. I'll join too. Xiaohan smiled and stepped forward with light steps. At this point in the challenge, the second-class and third-class disciples were no longer able to participate. Even if the immediate disciples made a move, they would have to bear the huge risk of failure. Although she had entered the martial emperor stage and understood the complete power of the rules, she was not completely confident. It would be fine if she succeeded. However, if she failed, it would allow Qin Hao to see more clearly, which would be of some help to him. Let me experience the power of the divine soldier for the princess. Mo Xian saw Zhou Wudao make a move and immediately chased after him. The Moro Kingdom and the Great Zhou Empire had a long-standing feud. Since the other party had made a move, how could he fall behind? Han Qingji's brows furrowed slightly. Mo Xian really couldn't control his temper and was acting up again. However, as Xiao Han stepped out of the Daozong Peak formation, Qingji Han suddenly straightened her face and said, "Let's go together." After she finished speaking, she quickly caught up with Mo Xian. The two figures gradually converged with Zhou Wuk and the other two. It's the Daozong Peak again. The immediate disciples of the Yaowang Peak have also made a move. Discussion spread throughout the arena. The Daozong Peak had the most disciples, and the number of prodigies also included nearly half of the masters of this year. Based on the performance of the Fallen Emperor Bei assessment, Zhou Wuk and Xiao Han were truly the few people who stood at the top of the world. There were only a few people who could not lose their brilliance in front of Zhou Wuk and Xiao Han. Ning Tianxing, the Prince of Ningwu, was one of them. Of course, among the 5 people who had stepped onto the platform, the first princess of the East Continent, Qingji Han, was also one. The last person was the disciple of the current master of the Divine Palace, Qin Hao. Qin Hao, Xiao Han, Zhou Wuk, Ning Tianxing, and Qingji Han. They were probably the most talented people in the Divine Wilderness Continent's 4 regions and nearly 100 empires. Today, although Qin Hao had not made a move, 3 of them had appeared at the same time. Looking at the figures of Zhou Wuk, Xiao Han, and Qingji Han, it was enough to make the disciples of the 7 peaks excited. This time, the continent's most talented people challenged the divine soldier. What would the result be? You don't want to try? Eastern Sky laughed. leaving junior sister Xiao Han alone. Aren't you worried? With master and eldest senior brother here, what do I have to worry about? Qin Hao replied. His deep eyes had lost much of their luster. He had yet to walk out from his heavy thoughts. Today, the Xintian Peak was hosting the Fire Beacon Festival. The elders, senior brothers, and even the disciples of the Seven Peaks were undoubtedly concerned about the 12 peerless divine soldier on the platform. They wanted to know who would obtain the divine soldier in return. However, Qin Hao had long lost interest in the divine soldier. No matter who obtained it, it was meaningless. This was because the true bodies of the 12 divine soldier were all with him. As they spoke, Showuk's group of 5 stepped onto the platform stairs. Step by step, their momentum was indomitable and unstoppable. The overall cultivation of the 5 of them was indeed much stronger than Zhang Yi, Hai Sha, Feng Qianli, and Yi Shuihan. Hai Sha and the others didn't even cause too much pressure when they reached the 12th step, so how could they possibly stop these 5 people? At this moment, after the 5 of them stepped onto the stairs, they also headed in different directions. Although Si Sand and Zhang Yi had attacked earlier and used the rules of Tao to shatter the weapon chests, causing the divine soldier to appear. However, Showuk's group stared at the platform and did not walk towards the armor that had already appeared. Mo Xian's gaze landed on the first weapon chest floating on the platform. It was complete. Showuk naturally wanted to challenge the 7th one, which was the one that Feng Qianli had failed to challenge. Feng Qianli had once said that even Showuk might not be stronger than him. Then, he would use his actions to prove whether the Sword Dao of the Sword Sect of the Southern region was stronger than that of the Zhuiying Sword Palace of the East Continent. Moreover, Mo Xian and Showuk both felt a familiar power from within the chest. It was as if their hearts were being summoned and somewhat uncontrollable. Mo Xian firmly believed that the divine soldier in the first weapon chest must be what he needed the most. Showuk also knew that there must be an extremely powerful divine sword in the 7th weapon chest. After all, the sword Dao in that chest was too turbulent and shocking. It was no wonder that Feng Qianli would choose it. After Zhou Wudao stepped onto the stone steps, he was a little lost. He did not know which chest to choose. He did not feel the power that he desired from the 12 chests. He did not know how the others felt. In short, it was difficult for him to choose. After a brief hesitation, Zhou Wudao's gaze finally landed on the weapon chest in the center of the platform. Although the weapon aura within the chest did not attract his interest much, however, compared to the other 11 divine soldier chests on the platform, only the one in the center was more suitable for his soul power. Then, he stepped forward and walked towards the weapon chest in the center. Buzz! A powerful vibration came from the stone steps. The power was turbulent and affected Showuk and the other 2. They could not help but look over. They saw that Xiao Han and Qingji Han were fighting on the stone steps. It seemed like they were arguing about something. You can choose any of the 12 divine soldier chests on the platform. Why do you have to fight for the one that I want? Xiao Han looked coldly at Qingji Han. After stepping onto the stone steps, she set her sights on the 11th chest. A strong signal came from the weapon chest. It seemed like the divine soldier inside was extremely compatible with Xiao Han's soul power and soul power. However, when she stepped towards the weapon chest, Qingji Han blocked her path and also stepped towards the 11th chest. On purpose? Or was it unintentional? Xiao Han did not know what Qingji Han was thinking. However, one thing was very clear. She wanted to fight with her. Yes, there are a total of 12 weapons on the platform. However, no one said that the 11th chest was yours. I have my eyes on it. Moreover, I can feel a strong spiritual energy fluctuation from the weapon chest. It is beneficial to my soul power. Of course, I have to challenge it. Qingji Han turned around and looked at Xiao Han. The 2 princesses looked at each other from a distance. The invisible friction between them sent out a dangerous signal. Qingji Han was not wrong. She did not want to fight with Xiao Han on purpose. It was the power inside the 11th chest that deeply attracted her. Since it was what she needed, she had to fight for it. My path from the bottom of the platform to here has always been straight. Moreover, I stepped onto the platform before you. As the princess of the East Continent, don't you know a little etiquette? Xiaohan said. The moment she stepped out of Daozong Peak's team, she felt a calling from far away and confirmed her goal. She did not believe that Qingji Han did not notice. Moreover, she walked towards a divine soldier first. If she was a reasonable person, she would not have set her goal in the same position as Xiaohan. Etiquette. Qingji Han smiled amusedly. In the cultivation world, you were talking to me about etiquette? Foolish. After that, Qingji Han ignored Xiaohan and went straight for the 11th divine soldier. When the Xiantian Celestial Lord organized the Fire Beacon Festival, he did not stipulate that they would fight for weapons in advance. Moreover, in the outside world, the divine soldier was only available to those who were capable. She did not think that she had done anything wrong. Even if she did snatch it from Xiaohan, so what? Xiaohan raised her eyebrows. There was no need to talk about the rules. Fine. Swoosh. A blurry silhouette flashed past, and a beautiful silhouette appeared in front of Han Qingji. In a flash, Xiaohan arrived before Han Qingji. She stepped onto the 10th step of the platform and said, "Only those who are strong will be able to obtain it." You. Qingji Han was slightly angry. She frowned. Was Xiaohan determined to fight with her? Then, she raised her palm. A platinum light vibrated from her body. She made a move that shocked everyone. She grabbed at the void in front of her and said, "Get down here." Chapter 1508. On the platform, Xiaohan stepped towards the 11th divine soldier. A majestic spiritual force came from the weapon box and resonated with her essence soul. It must be a divine soldier that was related to spiritual attacks. Qingji Han also sensed it. Her essence soul, the eye of nirvana, trembled. The power of the 11th divine soldier made her yearn for it. She stepped forward and blocked Xiaohan's path, intending to fight for it. A princess of the East Continent and the beloved daughter of Emperor Xiao of the northern border. Both of them were skilled in spiritual attacks. Both of them had their eyes on the same divine soldier and were unwilling to give in. Xiaohan stepped forward, crossed the space, and appeared in front of Qingji Han, stepping on the 10th step. Since the other party didn't follow the rules, she didn't need to care. Whoever was strong would get it. Qingji Han was slightly angry. A platinum light enveloped her body. She raised her hand and grabbed forward. She released her cultivation, and a majestic emperor's will swept out. This palm caused the expressions of all the disciples present to change. Emperor level. Yaguang Peak's Qingji Han had stepped into the realm of Emperor Yuan. Emperor Yuan's attack was no small matter. What's more, Xiaohan stepped onto the 10th step. It was the critical moment for her to take the divine soldier test. In an instant, a violent airflow brewed at the position of the 11th divine soldier on the platform. The void trembled. The 7 Peaks disciples felt their consciousness gradually become chaotic, as if their spirit was being invaded by an external force. That storm obviously contained a powerful spiritual attack. But at this time, Qingji Han struck a palm at Xiaohan from behind. The endless spiritual energy between heaven and earth crazily rushed towards Qingji Han's palm. Under her palm, a sharp palm energy burst out, whistling forward. Emperor Yuan attacked from behind, and the divine soldier suppressed from the front. Daozong Peak's Xiaohan was in danger. Buzz. A dazzling platinum radiance shone out, and her hair danced in the wind. Within the radiance, Xiaohan's beautiful face was like that of a goddess. Yuanqi swirled around her, ignoring the pressure of the spiritual storm. She turned around and slapped her palm towards Qingji Han. In that instant, 2 emperor intents filled the training hall, causing the hearts of the 7 Peaks disciples to tremble violently. Daozong Peak's Xiaohan had also stepped into the emperor realm. After entering the divine palace for 3 years, 2 of the new disciples had become emperors. This was really... boom! The 2 streams of palm qi collided with each other. Dilly rumbled and dissipated. Xiaohan was also a first-order Emperor Yuan, but she wasn't any weaker than Qingji Han. As for the spiritual storm that came crashing down on her, she was able to withstand it and disperse it into her origin energy. Zhang Yi, Sea Sand, and Yi Shuihan were all able to pass the test of the stone steps. Even Zhong, Ans was able to resolve it. Naturally, it was not difficult for Xiao Han, who had stepped into the Emperor realm. After all, Xiao Han's cultivation was already ahead of everyone, and she had comprehended the complete power of laws. At this time, the training hall quieted down, and the disciples of the various peaks looked at them. They originally thought that after this move, Xiao Han would fail and be thrown off the stage, because Qingji Han stepping into the Emperor realm was beyond everyone's expectations. After all, she was the first to do so. However, the result was a tie. Xiao Han also entered the Emperor realm, which surprised the disciples of the various peaks. Next, the competition for the divine soldier became a bit more intense. Among the new disciples, 2 people stepped into the Emperor realm, and these 2 people took a fancy to the same item. Above the void, the various peak venerables who were watching the competition looked down quietly, smiling without saying a word. The Fire Beacon Festival was originally meant to test the ability of the disciples. Xiao Han and Qingji Han had a tacit understanding and took a fancy to the same item. Let them fight for it with their own abilities. Perfected Daozong and Yaoguang Immortal Lord had no objections. As elders, they couldn't stand up and speak for their disciples and make the other party give up. Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, and Mo Xian all looked at the 2 proud daughters of heaven strangely. Then, they retracted their gazes and pretended not to see anything as they each moved towards their respective targets. How could they interfere? These 2 women had excessively strong backgrounds and cultivation bases. Not to mention that they couldn't suppress them with their identities. But if Qin Hao didn't say anything, who was qualified to say anything? Moreover, even if they wanted to persuade them, they were afraid that they wouldn't listen. If they angered them and caused the 2 women to explode, Zhou Wudao and Mo Xian would have no choice but to escape. Even Shou Wuk, who was born with the laws of the Sword Dao, wouldn't be able to stop them. They might as well ignore it. No one in the hall spoke. The 7 peak venerables were all silent, tacitly agreeing to this competition. At this time, Qingji Han looked at Xiao Han with a surprised expression. She didn't expect that the other party had also stepped into the Emperor realm. However, she wasn't nervous. They were both First-Order Emperor Yuan, and she was the first princess of the East Continent. How could she be afraid of the other party? Xiao Han's performance in the assessment of the fallen Emperor Bei was indeed better than Qingji Han's. Even on the Emperor Road, Senior Wu Jun once said that compared to Qin Hao and Xiao Han, Qingji Han was a little inferior. However, that was only a test of talent, not combat ability. If they really fought, Qingji Han didn't think that she would lose. "Do you really want to compete with me?" she said. Bathed in the platinum light, she saw that the Northern Frontier Princess was indeed outstanding. Her temperament and aura were enough to suppress all the proud daughters of the East Continent. "You made the first move, and now you're questioning me?" Xiao Han replied. Although Qingji Han was arrogant and rude, she had the right to be arrogant. From her, he could feel a trace of pressure that he had never felt before. This was a feeling that other women had never given him. Even when he first met Xinhuan Qin, he didn't have this kind of thought. Of course, there was another person in his impression. Xiao Han deeply remembered that during the Emperor Martial Tournament, there was a figure of an empress wearing a robe. After she appeared, she easily killed the Northern Yin Zhanyue Mansion's mansion master. She left a message saying that the killer was the East Continent's Empress Ziwei. Her words were so domineering and arrogant that it gave people a sense of deterrence that they couldn't look up to. At that time, Xiao Han's state of mind was in turmoil. She could see that the Empress and Qin Hao had a close relationship. She wouldn't ask, because sooner or later, Qin Hao would explain it to her. This was the trust she had in him. At this time, Xiao Han had also stepped into the Emperor realm. She knew how terrifying this realm was. Perhaps there was still a long way to go before she could compare to Empress Ziwei, but she wasn't afraid of Qingji Han at all. Buzz! Qingji Han took a step forward. Platinum light surged, and her emperor aura grew stronger. Her eyes became sharp, as if she wanted to intimidate Xiao Han. There was a demonic glint in her sharp eyes. Xiao Han felt a piercing pain in his eyes. In his mind, the silhouette of a lofty female empress appeared. Resplendent light enveloped her, exuding an aura of disdain, wanting to cause the heavens and earth to submit to her. This was the pressure of spirit Tao intent. Xiaohan's spirit Tao intent erupted at the same time. A violent spirit storm was born, and the light of calamity flashed. It bombarded the Empress figure, burying and annihilating her. Then, an even more powerful spirit, Tao energy, swept out and enveloped Qingji Han's body. At this moment, Qingji Han's mind trembled. In her consciousness, the image of the Empress descending also appeared. The Empress wore a crown on her head, and a 7-colored halo shone around her. She was like a god descending from the 9 heavens to dominate the world. Oomph! Qingji Han snorted. Her spirit, Tao energy surged and spread out from her body, shattering the Empress figure in her mind. At this moment, an incomparably huge eye appeared in the sky above the training hall. It was like a giant eye from the heavens watching everything, deciding everyone's life and death. It could wipe out all things with a single glance. It was the Eye of Nirvana, facing the giant eye in the void, which was like a demonic eye of destruction. The disciples of the 7 peaks all shuddered. It was as if the demonic eye's gaze could wipe them out from the world. Unknowingly, many disciples with unstable Tao hearts were already trapped by the power of the Eye of Nirvana. Even people as strong as Zhang Yi were all embarrassed. They had to release their rules of Tao to block it. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Xiaohan scolded. She slowly raised her hands, and the radiance on her body became brighter and brighter. It was as if it was going to cover the entire divine palace. An emperor's will connected with the heavens and earth, resonating with the Tao. It was as if it could dominate the world. Then, the shadow of a crown shining with 7-colored divine light appeared, covering the sky. It was so majestic that people couldn't help but worship it. At this moment, under the pressure of Xiaohan's emperor's will, many people's legs went soft, and they had the urge to kneel. What was unbearable was that the disciples of the 7 peaks were all affected by the power of Qingji Han's Eye of Nirvana. The Tao of Nirvana was too strong. It was as if it could wipe them out at any time. Many disciples who wanted to kneel but didn't dare to do so felt conflicted. They're really going all out. They're using both rules and emperor's will. They don't even care about our feelings. The disciples with weaker cultivations were trapped in the battle between the 2 empresses. It was simply worse than death. It would be better to just give them a stab. It was too uncomfortable. Enough. Clang. The sound of a guqin broke the atmosphere. It was magical. Xiaohan and Qingji Han, who were in a stalemate, both trembled at the same time. Then, the sound of a guqin flew over. It carried a vast emperor's will and swept toward the void crown. Xiaohan's eyes narrowed. She looked at the front of the uni-peak disciples. There, an outstanding figure shouted. A guqin spirit appeared in front of him. The sound of the guqin resonated with the heavens and earth. It was Ning Tianxing. Crown Prince Ning Wu wanted to stop the 2 sides from continuing to be hostile towards each other, but the sound of his guqin blasted toward Xiaohan. Why? Could it be that Xiaohan was wrong? No one knew what Ning Tianxing was thinking. All Xiaohan could do was release her emperor's will. She wouldn't give in to Qingji Han just because of Ning Tianxing's words. Moreover, the sound of the guqin blasted toward her. At this time, another figure stepped out. He stepped into the void and appeared in front of Xiaohan. His tall figure blocked her view and gave her a strong sense of security. Then, a flame of burning starlight illuminated everyone's vision. When the flame dissipated, the entire training hall seemed to have turned into a starry world. It was vast and endless. Standing in the endless starry sky, people seemed so small. Buzz! The void trembled. The sound of the guqin was blocked and swallowed by the starry sky. But it was only for an instant. The starry sky disappeared immediately, and the training hall returned to its original state. It was as if nothing had happened. There was only a young man in front of Xiaohan. His white hair fluttered in front of his forehead. He looked like a celestial saint from the 9 heavens. "Brother Qin Hao," Xiaohan chuckled. "Disperse your primordial spirit and emperor's will." Qin Hao turned around and looked at her. He said helplessly, "The junior brothers of the peaks can't take it anymore. Moreover, it will affect Wuk and Zhou Wudao." Xiaohan nodded and dispersed the emperor's will. The void crown turned into countless rays of light and entered her body one after another. Suddenly, the pressure on the training hall was reduced. "You still won't stop?" Qin Hao looked at Qingji Han again. "You think I'll stop just because you say so?" Qingji Han's brows tightened. The eye of void devastation opened and shone with terrifying emperor's will. The void rumbled and the will of destruction brewed. A ray of sharp killing light shot toward Qin Hao. "Stop? Who do you think you are?" Chapter 1509. The giant eye in the void looked down on the training field, and the might of the emperor rolled, intimidating the souls of the disciples of the Seven Peaks. When the light of obliteration shot out from the giant eye, it was full of a sense of destruction, as if everything would be annihilated into nothingness under the gaze. Qingji Han had obviously used the complete power of rules, and her rules were also annihilation. Xiaohan was just about to take a step forward and continue this battle. But on Qin Hao's body, monstrous flames surged out, and blood-colored demonic flames swept out, covering the sky and the sun, turning the sky into a sea of purgatory fire. The will of fire filled the world, and within the sea of fire, strands of starlight of the great Tao flickered with endless power, as if they could swallow everything. It was the meteorite rule that he inherited from the martial lord. When the martial lord became an emperor, he comprehended the power of the meteorite. It was vast and boundless, and his attacks were tyrannical. This power was passed down, and it was originally the complete Wuk. As Qin Hao's cultivation improved, its power would become stronger. Even though he had not stepped into the Emperor realm at this time, he was faintly touching the peak of the 9th stage of the primitive Emperor realm. To a large extent, he could unleash the true will of rules. With the experience of his previous life, his application of rules was naturally far from what Qingji Han could compare to. Not attacking, Izue looked at eastern sky. Qin Hao had not yet entered the Emperor realm, but his junior sister Qingji Han was a true Emperor realm powerhouse. Although there was a fine line between the Emperor realm and the 9th stage of the primitive Emperor realm, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. No matter how high Qin Hao's aptitude was, he was personally taught by the 7 peak venerables of the Divine Palace and bore the Tao of Nirvana. It was impossible for him to come out unscathed. "If anything happens to junior brother, I will fight the Emperor battle with you on the divine platform." Eastern Sky said expressionlessly. Izue's heart twitched a few times. He was threatening him to fight the Emperor battle again. How could he bully people like this? However, he didn't make a move to stop her. Although Qin Hao wouldn't be unharmed and receive Qingji Han's attack, he wasn't weak to the point of being finished with a single strike, as that wasn't an ability that a Migrez Peak disciple should possess. Since the 2 Peak Chief disciples did not make a move, the other 5 Peak Chief disciples naturally would not interfere. They also wanted to see if Qin Hao of the Migrez Palace, who had not yet entered the Emperor realm, and Qingji Han, who had entered the Emperor realm, had the ability to compete with each other. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the demonic flames roared and surged. A flaming demonic dragon flew out from the sea of flames that shrouded the void. Its huge body was blood red. It opened its huge mouth and spat out a breath into the sky. Heaven and earth turned blood red under this breath. Flames roared out like a stream of lava as it blasted towards the light of annihilation. Within the blood-colored lava, dazzling starlight of the great path flickered. It was as if meteorites were flying out one after another. The disciples present were incomparably shocked. Under the blood-colored sea of flames, it was as if they were sucked into the furnace of the great path, and everything was about to be refined. Even if Qin Hao had not entered the Emperor realm, this pressure was not the slightest bit inferior to the Emperor aura. Boom! Bang, 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 bang. Above the void, the light of annihilation shot out and actually pierced through the flow of lava. Dense sonic booms sounded, and the rumbling was intense. After all, Qing Shi Han had entered the Emperor realm. Stepping into the Emperor realm, her vitality would undergo a qualitative leap, and her soul power would also be stronger than Qin Hao's. This was indeed not something that talent could make up for. However, with every sonic boom, the power of the light of annihilation would be weakened by 10%. When the dazzling beam of light blasted through the lava and landed on Qin Hao's body, its power was at least reduced by half. Even so, the power still shook Qin Hao and forced him to take a step back. His mind felt as if it was about to be torn apart by Qing Shi Han's powerful spiritual attack. Qin Hao operated the indestructible samsara art, and the terrifying red lotus demonic flame wandered around his demigod body. A wave of Emperor spirit shook out, extinguishing the spiritual attack that invaded his mind. How could a person who had just entered the first order of the Emperor realm shake his true 9-star Great Emperor soul? However, Qing Shi Han's vitality was indeed powerful, and she forced him to take a step back. After all, his cultivation was one realm lower. But Qin Hao also did not release his dragon soul. If he transformed, it would be hard to say. This woman is powerful. Big Brother was forced to take a step back by her. Xiaoguo was a little surprised. In his impression, no cultivator of the same generation who fought with Qin Hao had ever done this. They were either killed by Qin Hao in one move, or they were brutally beaten. There were even few who were on par with him. But this first princess of the East Continent actually forced Big Brother to take a step back. Yi Shuihan nodded slightly. Qing Shi Han was indeed powerful. If it were him, he would have been seriously injured. At this time, he was in the same realm as Qin Hao. It was enough to see how strong the latter was. Xiaoguo and Yi Shuihan gave the princess of the East Continent a high evaluation. However, Qing Shi Han's expression became ugly. He only took a step back. She was Emperor Yuan. She used her essence, soul, and the laws of the Emperor realm. But this Qin Hao did not enter the Emperor realm. He only took a step back in front of her. This was simply, come again. A sense of humiliation surged from the heart to the whole body, and it became stronger and stronger. Qing Shi Han felt greatly humiliated. In the past, she only needed to look at her opponents, and they would be mentally injured, becoming stupid and crazy. In the worst case, they would die on the spot. She had never met someone like Qin Hao. He only took a step back after receiving her Nirvana Dao intent. She was now an emperor. Buzz. In the void, the giant eye that overlooked the world erupted with an even more turbulent spiritual vibration. A majestic power of the great Tao erupted from Qing Shi Han's body and rushed towards the eye of Nirvana. A spiritual storm was born in the giant eye. It was earth-shattering. Terrifying spiritual light scattered in all directions, wanting to cover the entire training hall. At this moment, the expressions of the disciples of the Seven Peaks in the training hall changed drastically. An emperor could destroy everything with a single thought. They had not entered the emperor realm and were unable to resist at all. "Stop!" Izue shouted in a deep voice. He flicked his finger, and the space vibrated with the sound of a zither. A pressure that was dozens of times stronger than Qing Shi Han's filled the air. The light beam passed through the void forcefully, and the giant I was instantly penetrated and dissipated. Eldest senior brother, Qing Shi Han's essence soul, was dispelled, and her Emperor realm intent was suppressed by Nirvana Great Emperor Izue. She no longer had the majesty of an empress. At this moment, she was completely suppressed and had no power to speak of. "It's just a spar. How can you not know the severity of the situation?" Izue shouted in a reprimanding tone. If this continued, it would not be just a spar. If Qing Shi Han used her ultimate move, someone would die. Furthermore, Qin Hao did not seem to have used his full strength. If he used his full strength, wouldn't Xiantian Peak be razed to the ground? How would Shirshu Xiantian put his face? "You're lucky." Qing Shi Han angrily glared at Qin Hao. She did not accept Xiao Han. She ignored Ning Tianxing and even fought with Qin Hao on the spot. But she could not ignore Izue's words. "The lucky one is you." Xiao Han stepped forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Qin Hao. If they really fought, they would not be the ones at a disadvantage. Shu Xiantian can only create a limited number of divine soldiers. It is inevitable that there will be disputes because of the same gaze. However, a test is a test, not a test for us to fight with our lives. Qin Hao nodded in Yizui's direction. The chief disciple of Yaowang Peak was much more magnanimous than Qing Jihan. Yizue smiled stiffly. If she did not make a move, the eldest disciple of Migre's palace, Eastern Sky, beside her, might really drag her to the divine platform to fight an emperor battle. Qin Hao smiled. Naturally, he did not know about Yizui's grievance. He then looked at Qing Jihan and said, "First and last should follow the rules. If all the disciples of the Seven Peaks take a fancy to the same item and start fighting and killing each other, where is the propriety? Who are you? I don't need you to lecture me." Qing Jihan said. Qin Hao smiled carelessly. "If you insist, there is no harm in going to the Tao platform to undergo the divine soldier test. Honor, let's back off." Okay. Xiao Han followed Qin Hao and moved aside. She looked coldly at Qing Jihan. If not for Qin Hao's words, she definitely would not have moved aside. Oh, there's more. Qin Hao looked in Ning Tianqing's direction. Martial Uncle Yun, he said, that Brother Tianqing has learned all of his teachings on formations and can already guide formations in a tune. If there is time, I would like to ask Brother Tianqing for some pointers. I hope you will not be stingy with your guidance. Just now, when Xiao Han and Qing Jihan were in a stalemate, Ning Tianqing's intervention was not a big deal. However, he only sent out a single sound and attacked Xiao Han. What was the reason for this? Brother Qin, as the direct disciple of the main peak, you have the right to exchange pointers and discuss with the people of the Six Peaks. My master once told me that you also learned his way of guiding the array. I don't dare to teach you, but let's learn from each other. Let's learn from each other, Ning Tianqing replied calmly. This meant that if Qin Hao wanted to fight, he would accompany him at any time. He was not afraid at all. The people of the Seven Peaks looked at the four people with strange expressions. Daozong Peaks, Xiao Han, and Yaowang Peaks Qing Jihan. Migre's main peaks Qin Hao and Uni Peaks Ning Tianqing. Because of the same divine soldier, these four people were tied together. Faintly, their words were filled with a strong smell of gunpowder. As expected, heroes love beauties. Si-san smiled. Ning Tianqing had only sent out a single sound. It was indeed unfair. Qin Hao had stood out and shouted at Ning Tianqing. He was clearly venting for Xiao Han. However, Crown Prince Wu Ning was not afraid at all. If there was a challenge, he would accept it at any time. What beauties! I just want to get the divine soldier on the stage. Lei Jiao let out a low, muffled roar. As direct disciples of Mizang Hall, Si-san and Zhang Yi had both failed. He knew that even if he went up, he would not be able to get the divine soldier to recognize him as its master. As for beauties, I don't need them. For a moment, the disciples of Mizang Hall all laughed. The disciples of their peak were all martial arts fanatics. They wanted to reach higher realms. Their desire for the divine soldier was more realistic than beauties. Please, Qin Hao made a gesture. Since Qing Jihan wanted to challenge the divine soldier, what was wrong with letting her go first? If it was so easy to get, it would not be a supreme treasure that the mystic heaven immortal lord had worked so hard to create. I don't need it. Qing Jihan turned her face to the side. She did not want to give up her spot. Could it be that Qin Hao was looking down on her? Did he think that she could not pass the test of the divine soldier? You really don't need it. In the distance, Eastern Sky, who had the most outstanding temperament in the top team of Seven Peaks, spoke calmly. At this moment, his gaze was fixed on the stage. There, Zhou Wudao, Mo Xian, and Shou Wuk were at the juncture of the divine soldier test. Everyone looked over at the same time. Countless gazes fell on the stage. Then, with a boom, the ground shook like an earthquake. An unparalleled and powerful soldier aura rippled outwards. Mo Xian, who was standing in front of the first divine soldier, staggered backwards. A scarlet mark was left on his chest. He had failed. Following the first boom, Zhou Wudao also spat out a mouthful of blood. In an instant, his face became extremely distorted. There was shock on his face, but more anger. He was a prince of the great Zhou Empire and possessed the devouring soul of the ancient beast Taodai. Yet, he could not withstand the pressure of the great Tao instilled by the weapon spirit. The power of the great Tao forced his soul to explode. It was a disgrace. Mo Xian and Zhou Wudao's failure shocked the disciples of Seven Peaks. But Eastern Sky's words clearly meant that the focus was not on them. It was on the successor of the Sword Emperor, Shou Wuk, who was born with the rules of sword. Currently, only Shou Wuk was still standing on the stage. This genius of the way of the sword radiated with platinum sword chi. Numerous sharp swords circled around him. Beneath his feet, a lotus of sword catastrophe bloomed. The sword chi was undying and indestructible. Even so, under the suppression of the divine soldier's emperor aura, his lotus of sword almost lost its radiance. Cracks spread across it, and it was on the verge of disintegration. Shou Wuk's talent was not inferior to Qingji Han's, but he also showed signs of failure. The Nine Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 15:10. Countless gazes gathered and fell on Shou Wuk. Around him, sword will surged and the sword light flashed sharply. In front of him, there was a golden scorpion shrouded in dazzling emperor's light, exuding a majestic aura. The scorpion shone with golden light and had a metallic luster. It was obviously not a demonic beast, but a combination of armor. The scorpion tail that was raised high was like a god-slaying sword hanging in the sky. At a glance, it seemed to be able to destroy everyone's soul. It was unstoppable. The god-slaying sword hung in front of him, and the terrifying sword will attacked. Shou Wuk released his origin spirit and resisted with all his might. He stood on the sword lotus, and platinum sword chi surrounded him. However, every time the god-slaying sword hanging from the scorpion tail sent down a light beam of law, the sword chi surrounding him would shatter one. The pressure was too strong. At this time, the sword lotus under Shou Wuk's feet would produce a new wisp of sword chi, which would surround him again. As long as the sword lotus was not destroyed, the sword chi would not stop. The disciples of the Seven Peaks watched with breathless expressions. It was really too strong. Bathed in the platinum light, Shou Wuk's emperor's aura spread out. After Qingji Han and Xiao Han, he had also become a great emperor. He was the third person to become a great emperor. No, Ning Tianxing's Guqin music also contained emperor's aura. Only then did everyone realize that there were 4 people in the new generation who had stepped into the great emperor realm. This shocked everyone greatly, but now they did not have the time to envy others. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shou Wuk. They wanted to see how long this successor of the southern region, Sword Emperor, could last. After all, the sword lotus under his feet had cracks spreading. It was obvious that he was enduring the divine soldier's aura. Shou Wuk also knew that he was in a difficult situation. The emperor's aura released by the divine soldier was stronger than his. If he could not conquer it, he would not be able to hold on for long. Perhaps in the next second, the sword lotus would collapse and dissipate, which would be very serious. 10,000 swords heavenly peak. The head of the flawless sword pointed at the sky as boundless sword intent gushed forth from him. Beneath his feet, the sword lotus glowed with an extremely violent sword chi, resplendent to the extreme. Countless streams of sword chi shot out, whistling through the air as they soared into the sky. It was an extremely magnificent sight. It was as if the Sword Emperor's successor had infused all his strength into this attack. At this moment, the densely packed sword chi flew out like a tsunami. Being in the middle of the sword chi, Shou Wuk was truly dazzling to the extreme. He was like a god of swords. Everyone knew that what was about to happen would be shocking. If he succeeded, Shou Wuk would make the divine soldier recognize him as its master. If he lost, perhaps no one from the Seven Peaks would challenge the divine soldier anymore. This was because Shou Wuk's aura had reached its peak. Even when Xiao Han and Qingji Han had fought, the emperor will that had descended could not compare to his. Is this the ultimate power of sword Tao that Wuk obtained in the illusory palace? Qin Hao looked up at the void. The void was filled with sword light, and it had completely become a world dominated by swords. Every sword Qi spewed with destructive power that could pierce through all things in the world. Hundreds of thousands of sword Qi turned into a giant sword matrix. As a whole, it was shaped like a divine sword mountain, and its aura was unparalleled, suppressing everything. All of the sword Qi was activated by Shou Wuk alone. It was infused with his emperor will, spirit, and rules. This power could be said to be unparalleled in sword Dao, and no one could compete with it. Feng Qianli of the Juying Sword Palace was far from it. Qin Hao knew that this 10,000 sword Empyrean must have been the creation that Shou Wuk had obtained in the illusory palace. He wondered what kind of peerless native creature he had encountered, and how lucky he was. At this moment, under the 10,000 sword Empyrean, feeling the destructive power of the 10,000 swords, Qin Hao felt a great threat. If he let the Empyrean pierce down, he would be baptized by hundreds of thousands of rule sword Qi. Even with the domineering defense of the dragon soul, he would be severely injured. Go! Shou Wuk spat out a firm voice and pointed forward. Suddenly, above the void, the shocking mountain formed by the 10,000 swords tilted toward the golden scorpion on the platform. There was a loud whistling sound, and the piercing sound of sword light pierced through heaven and earth. It was extremely sharp and powerful, and it gave off a terrifying feeling of doomsday. Clang, clang, clang. The 10,000 swords fell like rain, endless, and all of them were directed at the golden scorpion. Every sword was infused with Shou Wuk's emperor will and rules, and it was terrifying. Not to mention hundreds of thousands of sword Qi. Just one of them was enough to kill any ordinary disciple in the Seven Peaks. This momentum of sword Dao was enough to be unforgettable for everyone present. At this time, on the platform, a storm of emperor pressure swept up. On the god-slaying sword suspended above the golden scorpion, brilliant light burst forth, and a ray of great path sword light shot out. It was like the origin of sword Dao, and it wanted to absorb all the swords in the world. The 10,000 swords came crashing down with a roar, but this ray of great path sword light actually dispelled the matrix of sword catastrophe. Suddenly, the 10,000 swords collapsed, and the sword Qi followed the ray of great path sword light and sank into the scorpion tail one after another, as if the sword Qi was returning to the origin of sword Dao. In an instant, the hundreds of thousands of sword Qi that enveloped the void were all absorbed and merged into the scorpion tail, causing the god-slaying sword to erupt with an even more monstrous sword light that seemed to be able to destroy the sky. I've lost. Qin Hao sighed helplessly. The golden scorpion on the platform was the Scorpio Palace. The scorpion tail contained an extremely terrifying power of sword Dao, and it actually swallowed up all of Shou Wuk's rule sword will. His rule sword will could not defeat the implement spirit. Victory and defeat had been decided. Bang! The sword lotus under Shou Wuk's feet suddenly scattered like shattered stones. At this moment, his face was extremely pale, and his aura was extremely weak. There was no longer a trace of sword will on him, and he was like an ordinary person. In the end, he still could not defeat the implement spirit and make the divine soldier acknowledge him as its master. Even if he used the strongest move of the sword dome, he still regretfully lost here. Shou Wuk of Daozong Peaks, sword Dao, unparalleled. A dignified female voice sounded. The Shintian deity lord, who had forged the divine soldier, had a rare look of admiration in her eyes as she asked. Yes. Shou Wuk looked up with a bitter smile. Unparalleled, sword Dao. He really had no face. You are very good. The Shintian deity lord praised and pointed to the divine soldier of the Scorpio Palace on the platform. It is really rare to be able to comprehend dual rule sword will. Although you have failed the challenge, your performance has attracted the great interest of the Scorpio implement spirit. As the mother of the divine soldier who had forged the divine soldier, the Shintian deity lord could naturally understand the spiritual awareness of the 12 implement spirits. Uncle Master, what do you mean? Shou Wuk did not understand and looked at the implement spirit. A failure was a failure, so why was it interested? It wants to fight with you again. It can do so at any time. If you can defeat it, it is willing to follow you. It can split the heavens and earth for you. The Shantian deity, Lord, smiled. The hearts of the disciples of the seven peaks shook at the same time. Was the implement spirit prepared to give Shou Wuk another chance to challenge it? Zhou Wudao stared at Shou Wuk with jealousy. He and Mo Xian had failed and were severely injured by the implement spirit. Shou Wuk had also lost, but at the moment of defeat, the Scorpio implement spirit did not attack Shou Wuk again. The meaning was obvious. Even though the successor of the southern region, Sword Emperor, had failed, his sword intent had attracted the goodwill of the implement spirit. Zhou Wudao turned his head and looked at the center of the Dao platform. At the center, the weapon box had collapsed, revealing a golden scale. He had been exhausted by the balancing power of this scale and the devouring power of the Tao Tai. He also pointed at the scale angrily and said, "My performance was also very outstanding. Why didn't it attract your interest? Do you want to have another go?" Whoosh! A platinum light wave blasted over. Zhou Wudao was swept away by a gale and rolled off the Dao platform, causing a burst of laughter. "Don't talk too much. No one will treat you as a mute. You have used up your second chance." After Mo Xian finished speaking coldly, he did not dare to turn back to look at the white goat divine soldier behind him and directly stepped off the Dao platform. "All right, I will challenge the Scorpio again when my cultivation has improved a little," Shou Wuk said happily. He took a deep look at the golden Scorpio and turned to step down. "Qin Hao, it's up to you." He lost not because of the rules, but because of Dilly suppression. In other words, Shou Wuk's cultivation was not as high as the Scorpio implement spirit and was suppressed. If he took a few more steps towards the Arch Realm and reached the 5th stage or even higher, he would have full confidence in subduing the Scorpio implement spirit. Although it would still take a long time, it was enough to make Shou Wuk happy. After all, he had established a good impression with the implement spirit. This was something that the other challengers did not manage to do. As for Qin Hao, Shou Wuk knew him very well. He surpassed the heavenly cycle realm to fight against enemies. Even if he had not stepped into the Arch Realm yet, he was not far from the Arch Realm. There was a high possibility that he could subdue these implement spirits. Qin Hao smiled. It was up to him. Subduing the implement spirits was not as simple as just talking. Before that, the successor of the East Continent's Empress Lingxian, Princess Qingji, will challenge first. Qin Hao said and gave up his position. Making the first move, wasn't that what Qingji Han wanted? Even the southern region's Sword Arch, Shou Wuk, failed to do so. He wanted to see if Qingji Han was stronger than Shou Wuk. "No need. I will wait for the next time." Qingji Han decisively turned around. Her style was very direct as she walked back to the Yaoguang Peak team. She gave up. The disciples of the Seven Peaks were a little speechless. They fought so fiercely before, but when the opportunity was right in front of them, she left in a carefree manner. However, after witnessing Shou Wuk's defeat, as someone in the same realm, even if the East Continent's princess entered the Arch Realm, she would probably not have the confidence. After all, Shou Wuk was not weaker than her. That was why she said next time. She is quite shrewd. Xiao Han said to Qingji Han's back. Qingji Han did not mind. She was indeed not confident. When she walked past Ning Tianqing, she stopped in her tracks and looked at her coldly. "Don't interfere in my affairs in the future. Mind your own business." The nearby Uni Peak disciples all heard this. They recalled that Ning Tianqing had acted to stop the two of them, but instead used a Guqin attack on Xiao Han. It was obvious that she wanted to protect Qingji Han, and the East Continent's princess did not appreciate it. How awkward. Ning Tianqing's mouth twitched. She wanted to say something but did not say it. "All right, is there anyone else who wants to challenge?" The profound Heaven Immortal Lord's voice came and shrouded the Dao platform. The disciples of the Seven Peaks froze on the spot. Even Shou Wuk had been defeated. Who else would dare to challenge the divine soldier? Even Lei Jiao, Fairy Qianning, Luo Yuliang, and the others who did not make a move intentionally avoided the profound heaven immortal lord's gaze. For a moment, the scene was extremely quiet. It was a stark contrast to the valiant and high-spirited attitude they had before. They could not wait to take all the divine soldier in their pockets. I'm afraid none of the disciples of the Seven Peaks can do it. Shenghua laughed. The defeat of all the personal disciples of Daozong Peak was a slap in the face. It is said that Ning Tianxing of Uni Peak is extraordinarily talented. Among the disciples of the two realms of the Divine Palace, there are less than 5 who are on par with her. Who said that just now? Eastern Sky asked Shenghua, but this sentence was obviously directed at the middle-aged Taoist of Uni Peak. The middle-aged Taoist was also a little embarrassed. Eastern Sky, you don't have to be like this. Forget it. There is no harm in trying. Junior Tianxing, show your skills to the chief disciples of the peaks. Ning Tianxing frowned in dissatisfaction. Was the middle-aged Taoist blind? Shouwak had also lost, but he was still asking him to go. No need, Ning Tianxing replied loudly. His gaze swept across the crowd and finally fixed on the divine soldier's platform. The 12 artifact spirits were nurtured by Uncle Master Xiantian with an emperor technique. Their abilities are extremely high, and they can deal with many of the ultimate techniques of the Divine Palace with ease. Their Emperor Realm cultivation is also much higher than ours. In my guess, they're infinitely close to the level of a 9-star Great Emperor, which is the first realm of the Emperor Tao. Good eye. The profound heaven immortal Lord smiled. The first realm of the Emperor Tao was known as the Great Emperor Tao in the martial world. Although the 12 artifact spirits were young and weak and could not be compared to a great emperor, they were more than enough to deal with little Yuan, who had just crossed the threshold of the Emperor Tao. In that case, among the disciples of my generation, no one can beat them. I am the same, Ning Tianxing replied. His cultivation was not high enough, so he spoke very calmly and firmly. None of the disciples of the Seven Peaks could do it, including him. Of course, this included Qin Hao. Chapter 15:11. The disciples of the Seven Peaks heard Ning Tianxing's words, and no one doubted it. The artifact spirit was close to becoming the Arch, and their most outstanding disciple had just become the Arch. How could a first-stage the Arch defeat a 9-star the Arch? Especially after witnessing Shou Wux's failure and Ning Tianxing's direct statement that he couldn't do it. Who else in the Seven Peaks had the ability to make the divine soldier submit? At this moment, several gazes looked at Qin Hao. In terms of talent, the only one who could be more outstanding than Shou Wux and Ning Tianxing was this personal disciple of the Palace Supremacy. During the Fallen the Archbay assessment, Qin Hao's providence was too strong, causing the Arch Realm platform to collapse. This was deeply engraved in everyone's hearts. They wondered if Qin Hao could perform better than Shou Wux. If even he failed, the 12 divine soldier on the Tao platform could be completely given up. Qin Hao was still standing below the Tao platform, as if he had no intention of making a move. Could it be that even he wasn't confident? After entering the Divine Palace for 3 years, only 500 people remained out of the hundreds of thousands of candidates. They were all geniuses in the past. Now, among the 500 people had entered the Arch Realm, they were Shou Wux, Ning Tianxing, Xiao Han, and Qing Jihan. Their talents could be said to be at the top of their generation. However, the only one who was more outstanding than the 4 of them was Qin Hao. Although Qin Hao had yet to become the Arch, many people still wanted to see how strong he was when he used his full strength. Shenghua, Shimu, Yizue, and Tian Ke all had the same thought. If it weren't for the fact that Eastern Sky didn't say anything, they would have asked Qin how to try. Is the Migres Palace disciple here? The Xiantian Immortal Lord asked. Migres Palace disciple Qin Hao. What can I do for you, Uncle Master? Qin Hao bowed to the Tao platform respectfully. Although he had been here many times, he had never spoken to the Xiantian Immortal Lord face to face. He was also the only peak master of the 7 peaks who had not taught Qin Hao before. In the past, Tian Ke had been the one to teach him the way of forging in his place. Do you want to try? The Xian Tian Immortal Lord looked over and saw Qin Hao's face. Only then did she recall the scene when the illusory palace opened. At that time, Tian Ke had told her that Qin Hao was the disciple of Migre's palace lord. Martial uncle, what Yini Feng Ning Tianqing said is true. No one in the Seven Peaks can make the divine soldier recognize them as its master. In fact, Wuck's performance was already very outstanding. Although the personal disciples of the various peaks present were all geniuses, they were all geniuses. However, it's still impossible to fight against an artifact spirit that's close to a Tao confirming emperor. Qin Hao replied. The Xian Tian Immortal Lord nodded. This kid was quite honest. In your opinion, if you want to control the 12 divine soldier that I have forged, you have to step into the Tao confirming emperor? Emperor and great emperor were just a word apart, but the difference was like heaven and earth. Only a 9-star great emperor could fight against a 9-star great emperor. In order to completely control the divine soldier and make the artifact spirit submit, you don't have to step into the Tao confirming emperor. As I said just now, the personal disciples of the Seven Peaks are all geniuses. As long as you surpass the 5th stage Yuan the Arch, I believe that many of you here have the ability to subdue the artifact spirit and control the power of the divine soldier. I'm not being arrogant. I believe that I can do it. I believe that the other personal disciples of the various peaks have the same idea as me. Qin Hao smiled. As a 5th stage Yuan the Arch, he could defeat the artifact spirit of a Tao confirming emperor. Before coming to the divine palace, if they heard Qin Hao say that a 5th stage Yuan the Arch could defeat a 9-star great emperor, the disciples of the various peaks would definitely laugh their heads off. They wouldn't believe it at all. However, after cultivating in the divine palace for 3 years, their understanding of the emperor realm and the emperor realm was far deeper than the martial artists of the outside world. If one's talent was tyrannical enough, it was indeed possible for a 5th stage Yuan the Arch to defeat a 9-star great emperor. Qin Hao was a living example. This person had jumped one heavenly cycle realm to defeat the senior disciple, Yu Hui, at Daozong Peak. That Yu Hui was a half-step Yuan the Arch. This matter happened on the 2nd day after he entered the divine palace. It caused a great sensation in the Seven Peaks. At that time, Qin Hao's realm was far from being as strong as it was now. If he fought with Yu Hui at that time with his current cultivation, he would probably be able to kill him instantly. Just thinking about it was shocking. Therefore, when Shou Wuck failed, everyone thought that perhaps Qin Hao had the ability to subdue the divine soldier. It wasn't blind belief, but irrefutable evidence. But now that Qin Hao is going all out, he probably didn't have the confidence. After all, the difference between a half-step Yuan the Arch and a great emperor was too great. At this time, Shou Wuck, Zhang Yi, Si Sand, and the others all smiled and nodded. Obviously, they agreed with Qin Hao's words. If they all stepped into the 5th stage Yuan the Arch, they were very confident that they could make the divine soldier recognize them as its master. However, it was almost impossible for them to do so now. What you said is not unreasonable. I used the Nirvana Emperor technique to nurture the artifact spirits and gave them the laws and Tao intent of the innate Tao the Arch. It is indeed a bit difficult for primitive emperors and minor Yuan thearchs to control them. In fact, the profound Heaven Immortal Lord didn't expect this batch of Seven Peaks disciples to subdue the divine soldier. She just wanted to see the abilities of the disciples of the various peaks. After all, she had been refining artifacts in seclusion and didn't know much about the disciples of the various peaks. Of course, she had to take out the artifacts that she had painstakingly created in advance to see if they were compatible with the essence souls and Tao intent of the disciples. Now, it seemed that her efforts were not in vain. Many of the disciples' essence souls and Tao intents were compatible with the divine soldier. Even if it is difficult for me to make the divine soldier recognize me as its master, it is not too difficult to control their laws and Tao intent. Qin Hao said with a chuckle. Oh, the profound Heaven Immortal Lord's eyes flashed with a strange light. She was a little interested and said, "You mean, even if you can't subdue the artifact spirits, you can make yourself fuse with the artifact spirits' Tao intent?" This was quite a challenge. The laws and Tao intent comprehended by everyone at the Emperor realm were different. To control two types of law power required extremely extraordinary talent. Shou Wuk had two types of law power, one of which he was born with, and the other must have been constantly comprehended from the sword Tao after stepping into the Emperor realm. Therefore, the profound Heaven Immortal Lord looked at him differently just now. However, Qin Hao said that he could fuse his Tao intent with the Divine Soldier. This surprised the profound Heaven Immortal Lord a little. "This disciple of yours seems to be very confident." Perfected Lord Daozong laughed from his seat in the void. Qin Hao was obviously not willing to be like the others. He wanted to prove that he was more capable of controlling the Divine Soldier. However, fusing with the laws and Tao intent outside of one's body was very dangerous. The slightest carelessness could cause one to go berserk. In the worst case, one would be crippled on the spot. Old man Migrez did not say anything. As his master, he knew best how capable Qin Hao was. Since he dared to boast, he would definitely be able to do it. Moreover, Migrez still had doubts. Qin Hao said that he could not subdue the artifact spirits at the moment. Could it be true? If you can truly fuse your Tao intent with the Divine Soldier, even if it is just triggering its power, I will let you take the Divine Soldier away. After the profound Heaven Immortal Lord finished speaking, he waved his hand. A vast platinum light swept out and suppressed the entire dojo, stabilizing it and protecting the disciples of the Seven Peaks. The power of triggering the Divine Soldier, which could be said to be a Tao Emperor, was terrifying. If Qin Hao could not control it well, not many people in the entire Xintian dojo would be able to survive, except for the chief disciples. "Let me try," Qin Hao said, then walked up the platform. "Be careful," Xiaohan said worriedly. In the blink of an eye, the gazes of everyone from the Seven Peaks fell upon Qin Hao. The personal disciples of the various peaks had all tried, but no one could subdue it. However, Qin Hao said that he had the ability to trigger the Divine Soldier's Tao might. Although Qin Hao was indeed talented and had been accepted as a disciple by Gong Zun, it still made people feel a little uneasy. What if he failed? What if he could not control it? In an instant, many people in the front of the dojo hid behind the group. Qin Hao walked up the stairs step by step. His target seemed to be the 8th Divine Soldier. No one knew what kind of weapon would be in the chest. However, everyone could sense that as he walked closer and closer, an extremely strong pressure was rolling out from the 8th chest. It engulfed Qin Hao, as if it wanted to bury him on the stone steps. However, he seemed to have merged with the pressure, becoming one with the Divine Soldier's Tao might. His steps were so natural and relaxed, as if nothing had happened. The disciples of the Seven Peaks stared with their eyes wide open. This scene was completely different from when Shou Wuk, Mo Xian, and Zhou Wudao walked up the platform. Shou Wuk and the other two's aura was stronger than Zhang Yi and the other three's. Zhang Yi and the other three's auras were, as if they were going to war, flattening the platform and the world. They had great ambition and power. However, they were ultimately not as outstanding as Shou Wuk. Now, Qin Hao was walking up step by step, and he did not seem to be under any pressure at all. He ignored the suppression of the Divine Soldier's Tao will. What kind of cultivation was that? He's stronger than you, Feng Qianli said. His words were directed at Shou Wuk. You don't have a right to compare me to Qin Hao. Shou Wuk replied calmly. How could a person who couldn't even open a chest have the face to say that? Even if Shou Wuk was indeed not as good as Qin Hao, Feng Qianli had no right to criticize him. After all, before this, the successor of the Sword Emperor of the Southern region had the most outstanding performance among the disciples of the Seven Peaks. Countless gazes were fixed on the platform. The 8th step, the 9th step. Qin Hao was about to reach the 10th step. Once he reached that position, he would be met with an extremely strong suppression from the Divine Soldier. Guxiu, the second-class disciple of the Mazang Hall, was sent flying with a single blow. Only the direct disciples of the Seven Peaks were qualified to reach the 10th step. As the disciple of the Palace Venerable, Qin Hao would definitely be able to reach the 10th step, but everyone knew that there was a huge difference between him and the other direct disciples. Swoosh! As expected, as soon as Qin Hao stepped onto the 10th step, an unstoppable and unbelievably fast light, which seemed to ignore space and distance, suddenly shot towards him like an arrow. Be careful, Xiao Han warned. Even though she knew that the other party would not stop at the 10th step, she still couldn't help but worry. Because this arrow was too fast. Even she, who had comprehended the power of laws after stepping into the Emperor's stage, didn't have time to stop it. Obviously, this arrow was even more powerful than the one Shou Wuck and the others had encountered. However, Qin Hao didn't seem to feel anything. He ignored the existence of the arrow and stepped forward. With a puff, the arrow seemed to have been nailed into his body and disappeared into his chest. Qin Hao only paused for a moment. Then he stepped onto the 10th step and stepped onto the platform. The disciples of the Seven Peaks felt a little numb. Is he still human? How strong is his physical body? He actually resisted the power of the divine soldier head-on, without even resisting. This guy, the corners of Lei Jiao's eyes twitched. His body flickered with crackling lightning. He was a little excited and wanted to compete with Qin Hao. However, he knew very well that he definitely couldn't reach Qin Hao's level. In comparison, Qin Hao was more like someone from the Mizang Hall. His indestructible physical body was so strong that it made others envious. Chapter 15:12. The Peak Masters and the chief disciples of the Seven Peaks all looked at him with admiration. No wonder he was the most talented disciple of the Divine Palace. Du Jun, Gu Xiu, and Zhongyan's performances were much worse than Qin Hao's. They were all on the same level, but their strengths and weaknesses were too obvious. Qin Hao walked forward step by step. It wasn't as easy as it seemed. The arrow pierced his chest, and a strong, tearing force spread. He felt his organs were being destroyed, and his spirit was crazily eroded by the arrow intent. He ran the art of endless samsara, and his body glowed. The Red Lotus Overlord Fire refined the arrow's power, and the Emperor's spirit began to explore the arrow intent. If he challenged the divine soldier directly like Shou Wuck and Zhou Wu Dao, would he really fail? Not necessarily, but he had to try his best. Maybe he could succeed. Not just the three souls, but the two laws of the martial lord realm, the laws of the inextinguishable samsara technique, and even the Emperor's spirit will be exposed to everyone. After all, the artifact spirit had the destructive power of a great emperor. There was more than one gap between it and Qin Hao. It was a threshold for an emperor to become an emperor. It was another threshold for an emperor to become a great emperor. Even though he had a demigod body and the art of endless samsara, it was still too difficult for him to challenge a great emperor as a martial emperor. Unless Qin Hao exposed his emperor spirit and completely erupted like the coiling dragon peak, suppressing everything. Otherwise, it was almost impossible to defeat the divine soldier's artifact spirit. In the divine palace, it was fine if he exposed his emperor's spirit. Even if the peak masters in eastern sky saw something strange, as long as Qin Hao didn't say anything, no one would force him to say anything. However, Ning, Tianxing, and Qingji Han were different. The disciples of the Seven Peaks on the dojo would be terrified too. These people would return to the outside world sooner or later. Qin Hao didn't want to expose himself to them. This was his trump card. People's hearts were unpredictable. Who could guarantee that these disciples wouldn't stand on the opposite side of the enemy in the future? So, he needed to change his method. He didn't want to challenge the divine soldier. Instead, he wanted to use his consciousness to force the artifact's spirit to submit to him. That way, his king's spirit wouldn't be exposed. Open. Walking to the front of the 8th chest, Qin Hao spoke, as if he was giving an order that could not be disobeyed. Dazzling golden light overflowed, and the 8th weapon box gradually turned into light and dissipated under this command, revealing the true appearance of the divine soldier. Instantly, a dazzling light shone, and a wave of Tao, proving realm great emperors, might permeated the air. Like a wave of light, it radiated from the platform to the training grounds below. Its power was boundless. This power was far more ferocious than when Sho Wuck and the others broke the other weapon boxes. So strong. It's so bright that I can't open my eyes. My soul feels like it's being destroyed. The disciples of the Seven Peaks, as well as the older disciples, covered their faces with their sleeves, not daring to look at the stage. Those with weaker cultivations couldn't help but tremble a few times when this power swept past them. Is this even possible? The thunder WYRM roared. With just a sentence, the weapon boxes automatically dissolved. Zhou Wudao, Mo Xian, Zhang Yi, Si Sand, and even Sho Wuck spent a lot of effort to break the weapon boxes. Outstanding people will always have extraordinary results. Sho Wuck sighed. As he had exhausted his essence, chi, and soul power, he hid behind Zhou Wudao, which reduced the pressure by a lot. Even so, his soul trembled. The eighth divine soldier was too sharp, and it was even more terrifying than the sword intent of the seventh golden sky scorpion. I don't know if I should say that you're lucky or unlucky. This eighth divine soldier is the true soul leader among the 12 divine soldiers that I forged. The mystic heaven immortal lord shook his head. As the light on the platform weakened, an armor that resembled a man and a horse stood there. This armor had the body of a flying horse with 4 hooves and 2 wings on its back. However, in front of its body, there was a human figure that looked like a person riding on a horse. It held a golden battle bow in its hand, and a quiver of arrows hung from its waist. At this moment, a golden arrow was placed on the battle bow. It looked up 45 degrees, and the arrow was slanted towards the sky. It looked majestic, like a god of arrows. As expected, Qin Hao thought it was the same as the Sagittarius battle armor that he saw in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. However, the golden battle armor before him was even stronger than the Sagittarius constellation's armor. He knew that this was the original form of the divine soldier, the original form when the Sagittarius Palace was born. As for the one that he saw in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm, it was already fatally injured and relied on the spirit chi of the primal crystal stones to survive. Martial Uncle, the 12 divine soldier that you forged should be able to sense each other and form a set of attack formation, right? Qin Hao raised his head and asked. In his heart, he had already guessed the truth of the matter. The lord of the Xintian Peak in front of him was the master that changed Li Wanji's fate. However, this Xintian wasn't a living person, but a mirror image Dharma body when he was alive. Not only that, the other 6 peak masters, the peak chiefs, and even the entire divine palace didn't exist. It was like an illusory palace. Qin Hao suppressed a wave of sadness in his heart. Even though he knew the truth, he couldn't immediately show it, because he knew that there was an extremely terrifying existence behind the divine palace. That person had the ability to reach the heavens. Perhaps it was this unknown horror that destroyed the entire divine palace and killed Eastern Sky and Chanyu. One could imagine how depressed Qin Hao was at the moment. That's right. Xintian deity Lord smiled and nodded. He looked at all the disciples in the dojo and said, not only what you see now, but all the divine soldier on the stage is in the form of armor. When you wear it, you'll be able to communicate with each other, especially when the 12 divine soldiers are gathered together. They can communicate with each other and borrow each other's Tao will. The killing power is beyond your imagination. When 12 levels of Tao insights of laws were gathered together, that might was shocking just thinking about it. That's enough. You haven't merged with the Tao will of Sagittarius yet, so you're not its master. The 12 ecliptic arrays are too far away for you. You can think about it first, Xintian deity Lord said. Let me show my incompetence. Qin Hao took a step toward the Sagittarius armor. He wanted to find out the true power of the armor from Xintian Empress. But there was no time now. Standing in front of the armor, the golden arrow slowly moved down and aimed at Qin Hao's forehead. It emitted an extremely sharp light. Just one arrow could easily penetrate his head and shatter his divine soul. But Qin Hao closed his eyes, and his hair fluttered gently. He didn't take the initiative to attack the divine soldier. What is he doing? Many pairs of eyes looked at Qin Hao, revealing strange expressions. Everyone didn't understand. Since he said that he could merge with the Tao will of the divine soldier, what did he mean by not attacking? Qin Hao's divine sense firmly locked onto the armor in front of him. His spirit seemed to be focused on the sharp tip of the arrow. His entire being was focused. He didn't have time to guess who the terrifying person behind the divine palace was. At this time, he could only continue to be immersed in the Fire Beacon Festival. Even if it was a dream, he had to accompany his two senior brothers and Master Migres to the end. The only thing he could do now was to conquer the Sagittarius armor spirit. With the soul of the great emperor, he could merge with the armor spirit's Tao will and learn as much as he could. This was because he might not be able to learn anything from the divine palace soon. A ray of destructive light condensed on the arrow, spewing out the terrifying Tao will of the arrow. Qin Hao didn't attack. He didn't even resist. He allowed the power of the arrow to penetrate his forehead and invade his sea of consciousness. Soon, his spirit felt like it was being torn apart. His soul felt like it was about to shatter. Wisps of terrifying Tao will of the arrow surrounded his body. At this moment, a dazzling golden halo flashed between Qin Hao's brows. It was like a bottomless pit that swallowed everything. It began to absorb the Tao will of the Sagittarius armor spirit, devouring it and refining it into his will. On his body, the terrifying Tao will of the arrow became more and more intense. It was as if his body would be torn to pieces at any time. The profound heaven deity lord was stunned when he saw this. In the void, the other 6 peak venerables and the peak chief were all stunned. They saw a trace of surprise in each other's eyes. As Nirvana, great emperors, everyone present had extremely strong spiritual senses. They naturally discovered what Qin Hao was doing. He didn't take the initiative to use his will to oppress the divine soldier and make the divine soldier submit to him. Instead, he allowed the divine soldier to release the Tao will of the arrow to invade his spirit. He was comprehending. Why didn't the disciples of the 7 peaks do this just now? However, at this moment, whether it was the upper echelons of the divine palace or the disciples of the 7 peaks present, they suddenly felt as if they had opened a door to martial arts. It was as if Qin Hao was right. He shouldn't have suppressed the divine soldier and forced the divine soldier to recognize him as its master. Instead, he should have comprehended the Tao will of the divine soldier and listened to its will. The sound of arrows was ear-piercing. It was as if countless sharp arrows were flying through the space and shot into Qin Hao's brow. His body was flowing with an extremely sharp aura of arrows. It was as if he had lost his soul and was completely controlled by the will of the arrow. He closed his eyes. Wisps of golden arrow light swam around his tough face like the power of thunder. Moreover, there were countless arrows piercing through his body. They whistled and flew everywhere. His entire body seemed to have been pierced with holes. His long robe fluttered. His white hair fluttered in front of his forehead. His resolute face seemed to have turned into a god of archery. He gave people the feeling that he was no longer himself. Qin Hao. Qin Yun couldn't help but call out. At this moment, Qin Yun couldn't help but shout out. The silhouette on the stage no longer had the slightest trace of Qin Hao's aura. Qin Yun couldn't even sense the slightest trace of the Qin clan's bloodline from him. Shut up. A powerful voice came from the void. It came from Tian Quan. At this moment, Qin Hao absolutely couldn't be disturbed, emptying his mind and comprehending the divine soldier's will of the arrow. Isn't he afraid that he won't be able to withstand it and his soul will be completely destroyed? Daozong said solemnly. He stared at the platform without blinking. The other peak masters all looked nervous. The situation on the platform was far more dangerous than they had imagined. When Qin Hao said that he wanted to merge with the divine soldier's will, everyone thought that he was using his mind to slowly penetrate the divine soldier's body. But who would have thought that he would dare to empty his mind and allow the divine soldier's rules to invade his body? If there was an accident, Qin Hao would have no way out. In an instant, his soul would be destroyed. How could Tian Quan and the others not be nervous? After all, he was the future pillar of the divine palace after Eastern Sky. This little guy is really bold. The Xintian deity master's palms were sweating. If anything happened to Qin Hao, she would become a sinner of the divine palace. Chapter 15:13. The arrows contain the power of the will of Tao corroboration, which could erode or even attack one's spirit. The higher one's cultivation, the more they hated having their will affected or controlled. At the Emperor realm, one was an emperor among men and enjoyed the wonderful feeling of dominating others. How could one be controlled by an external object? Faced with the 12 divine soldier, the first reaction of the 7 Peaks disciples was to control them instead of being controlled by them. They would suppress them with the will of the rules and make the divine soldier submit. That was the normal way to do things. Even if someone wanted to comprehend the rules and will of the divine soldier, they wouldn't let themselves go and allow the divine soldiers will to invade their spirit. After all, the consequences would be uncontrollable. What if the artifact spirits was eroded and one spirit was damaged? Even if one spirit was damaged, one might become a cripple. No one was willing to take the risk. It was too scary. But Qin Hao dared to do it. Zhou Wudao, Mo, Xian, Zhang Yi, and all the other disciples who challenged the divine soldier would never do it. But at this moment, seeing Qin Hao take action, they vaguely felt that he might be right. But could Qin Hao withstand the will of a Tao corroboration great emperor? It's risky, but it's also very interesting. Ning Tianxing watched silently. His heart wavered slightly, and he actually wanted to give it a try. But in the end, he suppressed his impulse. He couldn't take the risk. After all, he was the crown prince of the martial Ning Empire, the future great Emperor Ning Wu, a powerhouse who dominated the continent. How noble was his life? The arrow, while raging on the platform, grew stronger and stronger. Qin Hao was still enduring the invasion of the artifact spirit. But no one knew that he dared to do it, because his spirit was at the level of a great emperor, the third realm of the emperor realm, second only to the chief disciples of the Eastern Sky. His spirit was extremely powerful. Even if the fusion failed, he was confident that he could break free from the artifact spirits without suffering any mental damage or being controlled by the artifact spirit. This was his confidence. In the Xintian temple, on the towering platform, Qin Hao's body flowed with the law of arrows. It was as if his entire body was about to turn into an arrow. The arrow intent there grew stronger and stronger. Qin Hao felt that his consciousness was about to be completely taken over by the artifact spirit. In his consciousness, he saw an extremely resplendent golden divine arrow, as if it had been shot from ancient times, piercing through endless time to arrive in front of him. The incomparably sharp arrow pierced through Qin Hao's sea of consciousness. That terrifying power seemed to want to burst out from Qin Hao's head and engulf the world. He protected his god soul, and the king's spirit retreated to the side, allowing the arrow to travel through his body. At that moment, his body was transparent. It was as if he was going to condense into arrow will, the purest arrow will. Boom! A wave of pressure spread out from his body. The platform rumbled and shook violently. Qin Hao's deep eyes flashed with a sharp light. He slowly raised his palms, and a wave of martial will enveloped the centaur archer in front of him. At that moment, the centaur archer exploded with an even more resplendent light. A powerful arrow formed around him, as if it had been summoned by Qin Hao. The two sides resonated. Be careful, he's about to make a move. Back off. The quiet training ground suddenly became chaotic. As Qin Hao made his move, a vast threat of death spread out toward the 7 Peaks. Everyone began to frantically retreat. Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, Mo Xian, and even Ning Tianxing were the same. After all, when a Tao-confirming great emperor unleashed his law power, he could instantly crush the training ground and wipe out everyone. Who knew if Qin Hao could succeed? If he made the slightest mistake, the 7 peaks would be affected. Set up the barrier. Eastern Sky issued an order. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The bodies of more than 10 chief disciples and second chief disciples all exuded intense platinum aura. Waves of incomparably terrifying Emperor aura swept out. Waves of Nirvana Dili and unblemished Dili swept out and set up a powerful defensive boundary in front of the 7 peaks disciples as a precaution. With the immortal Celestial Empress at the front and the first seat and second seat of the immortal Celestial Empress at the back, this was a grand formation. More than 10 immortal monarchs joined the battle just to guard against Qin Hao. But around the Dao platform, no power interfered. This was also because they were afraid of affecting Qin Hao. However, Qin Hao took a step forward. It was as if he had become a different person. He no longer had the steady aura of the past. Instead, he gave off an incomparably sharp feeling, like an arrow. His hands slowly stretched out in front of him. The Sagittarius battle suit loosened its grip on the battle bow. The battle bow slowly flew towards him and landed in his palms. At this moment, a torrential arrow intent swept across the Dao platform. Terrifying air currents seemed to have penetrated through space and flew outwards. Seeing this, the Xin Tian Immortal Monarch flew down and grabbed Xiao Han's shoulders, quickly flashing into the distance. If Xiao Han was allowed to stay here any longer, Qin Hao's arrow aura alone would be enough to kill her. Arrow, Qin Hao shouted in a deep voice. Immediately, a golden arrow flew from the opposite side and landed on the string of his battle bow, tightening it. Creak! Qin Hao lowered his waist and got off the horse. He pointed at the sky and pulled the bow to a full moon. Instantly, the arrow intent on his body became even more terrifying. The air currents around him formed a violent storm. The arrow flashed with terrifying destructive light. The entire Xian Tian giant peak shook. Even the 7 peaks were shaking. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Qin Hao loosened his fingers as a dazzling beam of light shot up into the sky. It was so fast that no one could see its shadow. In the calm sky, a resplendent beam of light suddenly appeared. It was like a shooting star, arcing through the sky. Rumble! A muffled sound came from the top of the sky. The way of the heavens seemed to have been shot down by a single blow. A crack appeared in the sky above the divine palace. Devastating light of catastrophe flashed, and thunder spread out, giving off a destructive power. Success! There was no sign of instability in control, let alone being controlled by the weapon spirit. This arrow was personally controlled by Qin Hao. It could be called a perfect arrow. He used the power of a Dao, proving great emperor in the primitive emperor realm. Perhaps there was still a gap between him and a true Dao, proving great emperor. After all, the difference in cultivation level was obvious. However, to the disciples of the 7 peaks, this arrow was destructive. No one could withstand it. Showa could not. Qingji Han could not. Even when Ning Tianxing released his life spirit, he was not confident that he could survive this attack. After all, his 9-life Phantom Fox had 9 lives. Ha ha! In a moment of silence, Tian Quan's laughter came from above. It was as loud as a bell. Congratulations, your disciple's ability is not inferior to Eastern Skies, Daozong said with a smile. Daozong said with a smile. Not only was Yi Futian not inferior, he was even better than Yi Futian. The rest of the peak masters began to congratulate Tian Quan. However, in reality, they also had a part to play in teaching Qin Hao. Your junior brother is amazing. Sheng Hua looked ashamed. After all, he was in the primitive emperor realm. He did not dare to withstand the spiritual invasion of a Dao, proving great emperor. In the future, outside of the divine palace, who can be Qin Hao's opponent? Zhan Xiong of Mizang Palace looked at his junior brothers worriedly. There was absolutely no one in Mizang Peak who could withstand Qin Hao's arrow. Zhan Yi, Hai Sha, and Lei Jiao could not. Fortunately, it seemed that his junior brothers had a good relationship with Qin Hao. He hoped that it would be the same in the future. Otherwise, Zhan Xiong was really worried for them. He is so strong. The power of a Tao proving great emperor. He really did it. There was a lot of discussion in the training hall. Many people looked envious, but more people were filled with bitterness and inferiority. Qin Hao was of the same generation as them. However, since he was the disciple of Tian Quan, it was normal for him to have such ability. However, after leaving the divine palace, they must not be enemies with him. This arrow had left a shadow in the hearts of the geniuses of the four regions. It was also a warning to them in advance. At this point, the Sagittarius palace armor would probably fall into the hands of Qin Hao. The people of the various peaks were discussing. Some were happy, while others were worried. For example, the people of the Xianyuan family in the southern region. Qin Hao's talent was already monstrous enough. Now that he had obtained such a divine soldier, he had become even more difficult to deal with. They didn't know if the higher-ups of the family could take out a magic weapon that could compete with Qin Hao. Otherwise, when Qin Hao stepped into the Tao, proving great emperor realm, His Majesty Xianyuan Gaoyan would be in danger. Thinking of this, many people of the Xianyuan family thought of Changhe Lo. If Changhe Lo hadn't imprisoned the Dustfall platform, the chances of them obtaining one today were probably not high. Ning Tianxing's face became even colder. The moment Qin Hao held the battle bow, the threatening aura became even greater. It would be good if nothing happened. However, if they stood in his way of conquering the four seas, they would become a powerful enemy in the future. Qing Jihan's face was also ugly. There was no hostility, just a look of unwillingness. On the other hand, Emo Xian was silent. His gaze was fixed on Qin Hao's figure, constantly recalling the scene of him drawing the bow. Why did that figure look so familiar? At this moment, an incomparably majestic phantom appeared in Emo Xian's consciousness. A monstrous aura surged around him, as powerful as a god. He also had a pair of unfathomable eyes. Dindi, the person who had fallen in the East Continent, the forbidden person, was once the god of archery. With the sunset bow in hand, he was an undefeated legend in the Emperor realm. He was truly invincible. Suddenly, Emo Xian's vision blurred. It was as if the phantom in his consciousness had walked out and gradually overlapped with Qin Hao on the platform. The two figures eventually merged into one. At this moment, Qin Hao sensed something. He turned around and smiled at Emo Xian. Boom! When Qin Hao looked over, Emo Xian felt as if his head was about to explode. Why did he capture Zhong and alive, but not kill him? Why did he let him go? Why did he ask him to pass on a message before he left, asking about the last instruction of the Demon Emperor? The last instruction was the ancestors' warning to the Moro family to always remember Dinda's kindness and treat him as their emperor. Could it be that he's on the platform? A crazy thought flashed through Emo Xian's mind. Then, he looked at Qin Hao and smiled. It's very exciting. You actually merged the will of the arrow and unleashed its power of laws. The mystic heaven immortal lord landed on the platform with a look of admiration. I'm ashamed that I couldn't fully control it. Otherwise, the power of this arrow would be even stronger. Qin Hao said modestly. He opened and released his hand, and the battle bow flew back to the archer battle suit. The battle armor suddenly shone, as if the weapon spirit was responding to Qin Hao. Both of them had a tacit understanding. Modesty makes one improve. But why do I hear a hint of pride in your words? The mystic heaven immortal lord smiled and didn't give Qin Hao a chance to explain. He continued, It's yours in the future, but I can't let you take it away today. The Seven Peaks Tao discussion is about to begin. At that time, I have to give a gift to the new chief of the Seven Peaks. If you take it now, I don't have a second one for you. Ha! The Xintian Peak disciples laughed. They didn't expect that the seemingly dignified and cold Peak Venerable would have such a playful side. It's all up to you, Uncle Master. Qin Hao replied with a smile. Take it? There was no need to take it. The real Sagittarius Palace battle suit was on him. He had already refined it into his body. Not only the Sagittarius Palace, but also the Cancer Palace that was given to Ning Chao Fan. The other 10 battle suits were all in his hands. The 12 ecliptic array that was formed by the 12 battle suits, It seemed that he had a chance to test the power of the array. Chapter 15:14. The Fire Beacon Festival came to an end. Although it was for the disciples to challenge the divine soldier, many things could be seen from the results. For example, the strength level of most of the disciples. Overall, they made great progress. After 3 years of hard work, Ning, Tianxing, Shou Wuk, Xiao Han, and Qingjihan had the highest realms of the 7 peaks, stepping into the Yuan the Arch realm. Zhan Yi, Si Sand, Zhou Wudao, and Mo Xian were slightly weaker, but they had also comprehended the laws and were not far from the Archdao. The second-class disciples had obvious improvements as well. Many outstanding people, such as Zhong Ans, Gu Xiu, and Qin Yun, were not too far behind the personal disciples. There seemed to be no difference from when they came to the Divine Palace. The most outstanding disciples still had the absolute upper hand and were ahead of the others in terms of realms. This confirmed what Qin Hao said at Daozong Peak. On the path of cultivation, talent was the most important. Powerful innate talents were blessed by the heavens. Those with poor innate talents often had to put in several times, or even more effort, in order to be able to keep up with the cultivation pace of the strong and not be left too far behind. Those who did not work hard could only look up to the strong in the end. Of course, it did not mean that outstanding people did not need to work hard. They needed to work harder to stand out from their equally outstanding opponents. In the cultivation world, talent was the most important thing before hard work. In this Fire Beacon Festival, the person who had the most outstanding performance was undoubtedly Qin Hao. As an Yuan emperor, he had fused with the will of the Arch and unleashed the destructive laws of the artifact spirit. The arrow on the Xiantian Dao platform was destined to be engraved in the bones of the 7 Peaks disciples, making them revere him forever. As for the law power contained in that arrow, what was it? Qin Hao seemed to have deliberately not mentioned it, and the Xiantian Immortal Lord did not say either. This aroused the curiosity of many. Even so, no one dared to ask Qin Hao, lest they get an arrow later and experience it firsthand. The 12 divine soldier items will be left on the platform. Those who are willing to challenge them can continue to try, or try to comprehend the power of their arch will like Qin Hao. Those who want to return to their peaks can return to their peaks. The Xiantian Immortal Lord glanced at Tian Quebec. He would leave the rest to him. The 7 Peaks Dao discussion ceremony was about to begin. Since she had come out of seclusion, she had to discuss the ceremony with the 6 Peak Venerables. Immediately after, streaks of tyrannical auras flew to the Migres Palace from the void. The 7 Peak Venerables and the Peak Elders all left, leaving the Peak Chiefs to look after the disciples. Help yourselves, Tian Ke said casually. The disciples left one after another, but most of them remained, sitting cross-legged in the training ground. Waves of telekinesis shrouded the divine soldier on the platform, trying to comprehend the will of the great path of the divine soldier. Each of the divine soldier's artifact spirits were very powerful, comparable to great emperors who had proven their Tao. If disciples could comprehend the emperor's will within, it would be beneficial to their cultivation. However, no one was like Qin Hao, completely letting go of themselves and allowing the divine soldiers to invade them. Their comprehension only allowed their consciousness to pry into the will of the great path of the divine soldier. Once they could not withstand it, their consciousness would immediately withdraw to prevent their souls from being hurt. Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, Mo Xian, and many others sat cross-legged below the platform, trying to comprehend the different divine soldier. "I'm going too," Xiao Han said with a smile. She had been disturbed by Qingjihan and did not have the chance to challenge the divine soldier. However, the spiritual rules and will of the great path of the divine soldier were indeed very suitable for her to comprehend. "Go ahead." Qin Hao nodded and saw Xiao Han pulling Ke to sit in the crowd. "You monster." A figure walked past them, and a faint fragrance wafted over. Fairy Qianning of the Water Jade, Saint Nation, frowned deeply. She glared at Qin Hao and sat beside Xiao Han. "Did I offend anyone?" Qin Hao was speechless. You didn't offend anyone. It's just that from today onwards, they will all be afraid of you. Shenghua said as he walked, smiling as he came to Qin Hao's side. The chief disciples of the various peaks also followed and surrounded Qin Hao. The scene was spectacular. Look, even the chief disciples of the various peaks are starting to circle around him. Zhou Wudao used his arm to nudge Shouwuk, with a face full of envy and jealousy. Shouwuk was like an old monk in meditation. His spirit was focused on the golden sky scorpion, trying to comprehend the extreme sword Dao. He completely ignored Zhou Wudao. Don't look at him like that. You don't deserve to be compared to him. At this moment, a voice transmission floated into Zhou Wudao's mind from the Yaoguang Peaks team, who was comprehending the divine soldier. Zhou Wudao's face darkened. He looked at the other party and couldn't help but be surprised. It was actually Mo Xian. Why would the prince of the demonic Luo nation speak up for Qin Hao? When did they start to wear the same pants? Greetings, senior brother Shenghua and fellow senior brothers. Qin Hao nodded and smiled at Eastern Sky. Don't you have something to say to junior brother Qin? What are you waiting for? Shenghua muttered to himself. Immediately after, Shi Mu of Daozong Peak stepped forward. A look of struggle flashed across his face, as if he had come to a decision. He slowly said, Junior brother Qin, I stay away from him. Eastern Sky didn't give Shi Mu a chance to speak. He took a step forward and stood between the two of them. 3 years ago, during the incident at Daozong Peak, Qin Hao had just entered the Emperor realm and was suppressed by Shi Mu's Nirvana realm. If he hadn't arrived in time, the consequences would have been very serious. No matter what Shi Mu wanted to say, even if it was an apology, Eastern Sky wouldn't accept it. He refused to get close to his junior brother for any reason. In an instant, a dull atmosphere filled the air between the chief disciples of the various peaks. Almost everyone could feel how awkward Shi Mu was at this moment. He couldn't even take a step closer. Eastern Sky, he doesn't have any ill intentions. Shenghua said, It's none of your business. Eastern Sky raised his hand to interrupt Shenghua. He stared at Shi Mu with exceptionally sharp eyes, as if warning him. He said, Because of you, I lost my junior sister. If anything happens to Qin Hao in the Divine Palace, whether or not you did it, I will put the blame on you. Shi Mu, don't force me to do it again. It's not like I don't know how to kill. Eastern Sky, what happened to Muri back then had nothing to do with me. Shi Mu's mind seemed to have been hit by a heavy blow. He let out a loud roar and suddenly became agitated. His roar immediately disturbed all the disciples who were comprehending. Countless eyes looked over. Nothing to do with you? Eastern Sky smiled. Did Shi Mu think he was easy to fool because he was young? Back then, they entered the Divine Palace together. Because he was jealous that Eastern Sky was accepted as a disciple of Migre's palace, Shi Mu competed with him everywhere. Later, when he stepped into the Imperial Realm, he took advantage of Eastern Sky's absence and challenged Migre's palace as a disciple of Daozong Peak. At that time, Muri was left alone in Migre's palace and had not yet entered the Imperial Realm. If Muri had not been depressed and her Taoist heart had not been damaged, if she had not suddenly attracted the Imperial tribulation during the fight, how could she have died? It was Shi Mu who caused Muri's death. No matter what the reason was, no matter what explanation was given to him, Eastern Sky would never forgive him. Never. Get lost. Eastern Sky raised his eyebrows. An extremely tyrannical Nirvana Emperor Qi swept out. His body was raging with platinum flames. The pressure of the next Lord of the Divine Palace forced the chief disciples of the Six Peaks to step back repeatedly. At the same level, Shi Mu could not compete at all. His body shook, and he stepped back several meters in a row before he could barely stand firm. Changyu, let's go. Eastern Sky shouted. He grabbed Qin Hao's arm and directly left the training hall, leaving behind a figure that all the disciples of the Divine Palace were in awe of. He was too strong. Although they were both chief disciples, Eastern Sky's cultivation had suppressed the chief disciples of the Six Peaks to the point that they could not stand firm. This scene was very similar to Qin Hao's. In this generation of disciples, Qin Hao was also unparalleled in his generation. However, Shermu's heart was heavy at the moment. He was depressed to the extreme. Streaks of blood climbed up his eyes, and his face was blue and dark. With a bang, his Taoist heart seemed to have been pierced by an external force. His body was raging with platinum flames. The flames were as sharp as a blade and were difficult to control. There was a faint sign that his will was collapsing. "Shermu, pay attention." Shenghua raised his hand and grabbed Shermu's shoulder. The incident that year had caused a huge sensation in the Divine Palace. Although he did not know the process, he believed that Shermu would not have forced Miori to attract the Imperial Tribulation and be buried in it. There must be another reason. He doesn't believe me. We grew up together. Why wouldn't he believe me? I didn't kill Miori. I was just defending her. I even blocked the Imperial Tribulation for her. I risked my life to save her. I don't remember. Why can't I remember? Shermu let out a hoarse cry. His whole body was like a smoking chimney. He swept across the sky with majestic black smoke and fell into the ninth heaven spirit waterfall of Daozong Peak. He exploded into huge waves, and the 7 peaks shook. Shermu, Izue, Zhan Xiong, Tian Ke, and the others were shocked. "It's okay. Let him be alone." Shenghua waved his hand helplessly. His junior brother had been in this state for many years. After Miori's death, Shermu often became mentally deranged. If it were not for his extraordinary talent and his master's constant guidance, he would not have been able to reach the Nirvana plane. However, Shermu had reached the Nirvana plane 300 years ago. After so long, he was still stuck at the small success stage and could not take half a step forward. It seemed that he would not be able to make any progress in this lifetime. "Eldest senior brother, what you're doing will embarrass senior brother Shermu." After leaving the training hall, Qin Hao followed behind Eastern Sky. "Embarrass?" Eastern Sky suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned to look at Qin Hao. "He deserves it. This person is narrow-minded. Stay away from him in the future." "Senior brother, don't you think you're too?" Changyu saw Eastern Sky's cold gaze. "Forget it. I'll keep my mouth shut." When a martial artist reached the Nirvana plane, they would be reborn several times, and their state of mind would be cleansed. How could they be narrow-minded? Such a person would not be able to reach the second level of the Emperor realm. "Senior brother Qin Hao, senior brother Qin Hao, wait." At this moment, someone called out to them from behind. Eastern Sky, Changyu, and Qin Hao immediately looked over. It was Yaowang Peaks and Mo Xian. He had followed them all the way here. "What's the matter?" Eastern Sky asked Mo Xian. "Greetings, senior brother Eastern Sky, senior brother Changyu. I have some personal matters to discuss with senior brother Qin Hao. I wonder if..." When Mo Xian saw Eastern Sky's expression, even if the other party did not emit any hostility, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. His hair stood on end. "Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, I'll return to the peak after a few words with him." Qin Hao said, "If you don't come back in half an hour, I'll go find you." "Changyu, let's go." The air under Eastern Sky's feet spread out, and he and Changyu rose into the air. 2 rays of light wrapped around their bodies and flew toward the main peak of Migres. No wonder he's the future master of the Divine Palace. This aura, Mo Xian's face was full of admiration. "If you want to show your respect to senior brother Eastern Sky, I'll call him back." Qin Hao said. "Don't." Mo Xian trembled. Then he slowly bent one knee and knelt down in front of Qin Hao. Mo Xian, descendant of the great Emperor Moro and descendant of the Moro clan, greets the Imperial Lord. Congratulations on your return. Chapter 15:15. The Sovereign Lord was the supreme of the sovereigns. No one dared to disobey his orders in the East Continent. The sovereign's servants cultivated for hundreds of years and went through the life and death sovereign tribulation before they could become sovereigns. However, they were willing to become someone's servant and be branded with the spiritual mark of a servant. They gave up their pride and took pride in their master. The Moro royal family was Dinda's servant in the East Continent. Few people knew about this. Even the 4 divine generals who accompanied Qin Hao in the East Continent didn't know about it. Taking Dindi as their master had always been the highest secret of the Moro royal family. Only the direct descendants of the Moro royal family and Dindi would secretly maintain a master-servant relationship under special circumstances. Now, the most talented prince of the Moro royal family, Mo Xian, who was so proud that he didn't care about the position of crown prince, actually knelt and bowed to Qin Hao. People in the East Continent would be shocked if they saw this. If Zhou Wudao saw this, he might think it was an illusion and wouldn't believe his eyes. Qin Hao's heart trembled when he heard the words, "Sovereign Lord." He hurriedly pulled Mo Xian up, and the two flashed toward a cave residence on the mountainside of the Xintian Peak. They waved their hands and set up a barrier. "Rest assured, Sovereign Lord, I followed you all the way here." No one noticed. Mo Xian's eyes were filled with fanaticism. Although he tried to suppress his excitement, it was obvious that he was very excited. "How did you recognize me?" Qin Hao asked cautiously. "I guessed." Mo Xian lowered his head and replied softly. The Moro royal family didn't have any pride in front of the sovereign lord. Phew! Qin Hao raised his head and heaved a long sigh. He thought that he had given himself away in the training ground. Thinking about it carefully, since he had asked Zhong to pass the message, and he had used the sunset arrow art on the Dao platform, the descendant of great Emperor Mo Luo would naturally know the method of using the sunset arrow art. With Mo Xian's intelligence, how could he not have guessed it? It's been 600 years. Have you Moro family been well? How about Mo Qinjia? Is he doing well? The aura on Mo Xian's body made Qin Hao feel extremely warm. He couldn't help but ask. Everything is fine. The family has always believed that the emperor is not dead and has always been looking forward to your return. It's just that 50 years ago, Ancestor Thousand Tribulations failed to cross the unblemished tribulation and died. Mo Xian said sadly. Mo Qinjia, the son of great Emperor Mo Luo, could be considered Qin Hao's half-adopted son. Qinjia. Qin Hao felt a wave of pain in his heart as he thought back to the past. Every frown and smile of his old friend seemed to be right in front of his eyes. At that moment, the world learned that great Emperor Mo Luo and Dindi had made an agreement during the battle at Sunset Peak. The loser would be sent to their territory. Great Emperor Mo Luo was defeated and the entire Moro Empire was incorporated into Daqin. Because of this, Qin Hao had a good reason for his actions. But in reality, he had entrusted his entire family to Qin Hao and let his descendants recognize him as their master. Perhaps Moro was unwilling at that time, but he had no choice. Zhan Wu wanted to seize the opportunity to take over Moro Empire and annex Moro's territory. Who knew that under Qin Hao's orders, the entire Daqin army would retreat from Moro's territory? Only Yufeng and Zhan Lang were left behind to guard the territory. They helped the Moro family to recover the territory and also served as a deterrent to the surrounding tribes and the Great Zhou Empire. This matter made Zhan Wu unhappy. It was such a good opportunity, but great Emperor Mo Luo died and gave away a piece of fertile land. Moreover, that battle wasn't easy. There were many casualties among Daqin soldiers. They were all elites who had followed them all the way. Obviously, Qin Hao used his trump card. Other than that, he also gave a large amount of cultivation resources to the Moro family. Even though he was unhappy, Zhan Wu couldn't influence Qin Hao's decision. It wasn't until several decades later that the Moro Empire gradually stabilized and had the ability to protect itself that Yufeng and Zhan Lang returned to Sunset Peak. Without Emperor Mo Luo, the entire Moro family would have become ghosts in hell. We will always remember this favor. Mo Xian felt uncomfortable in his throat. His voice was a little choked, even though he didn't witness the hardships of that generation of Moro family members. But in his bones, the thought of Dindi as the master was instilled in him since he was born. Without Qin Hao, there would be no Moro. I'm just fulfilling my promise. Senior Moro helped me comprehend the power of the peak of the third level with the resolution to die. He also took action and sacrificed his life. No matter what his original intention was, It's true that he helped me clear the obstacles in my cultivation. Qin Hao thought about the past. It was like a dream. Without great Emperor Mo Luo, he probably wouldn't have been able to see the opportunity of the fourth level of nirvana. Unfortunately, he died in the Valley of the Gods before he could fully comprehend it. He didn't manage to break through to the nirvana realm in the end. What happened back then? We definitely don't believe the bullshit news of the four divine generals betraying you. Senior Zhang Lang and the others are loyal to you. It's impossible for them to betray you. Mo Xian asked. If it wasn't for Mo Qianjie stopping them, Moro family's army would have broken into Daqin and charged towards the Sunset Peak to demand the truth from Zhang Wu and Han Lingxian. But Mo Xian also knew that with Moro family strength, the army would be destroyed by Zhang Wu's men before they could reach the Sunset Peak. Dinda was already dead. Sunset Battle God and Han Lingxian ruled the world with their hands. Daqin was so powerful. Moro family was like an egg hitting a rock. It's not important. I don't want to be entangled with who's right and who's wrong. It's fine as long as you guys are fine. In the future, work hard and rely on yourself. Don't be controlled by Han Lingxian and Zhang Wu. Qin Hao reminded. How could it not be important? Rumor has it that you're dead, and Mo Xian glanced at Qin Hao. With his eyesight, he could see that this was a young body that was very likely to have been possessed. This proved that Dinda had indeed died once. His body was destroyed, and he was forced to possess someone else's body. The murderer was so vicious. How could he just let it go? This hatred must be avenged. He could let go of Dinda, but Moro family would not. Mo Xian. Qin Hao yelled and stared at the descendant of Mo Qianjie. Forget it. Even if I return to my peak state, Zhang Lang, Yu Feng, and the others will still be here. With the support of your Moro family in Penglai Immortal Island, I won't be able to touch them. There was more than one murderer, and all of them had shocking cultivation. You can't touch them now, but it doesn't mean you can't touch them in the future. Now that you've become the disciple of Palace Lord, you can borrow the power of Palace Lord. As long as you say the word, I believe that Senior Brother Eastern Sky and Senior Brother Chang, you will step into the mortal world and kill those poisonous people. Mo Xian's chest was burning with a fire, as if it could burn everything. With Qin Hao's position in Eastern Sky's heart and his current identity as Palace Lord's disciple, he believed that the Peak Masters of the Seven Peaks would be willing to help. Even if the Peak Masters didn't do anything, just a few elders-in-chief could wipe out the entire East Continent. In this world, who could stop Palace Lord? It was just that Palace Lord didn't want to enter the mortal world. Borrow the power of Palace Lord? Qin Hao's eyes became confused. The figures of Eastern Sky, Chang Yu, and many others appeared in his mind. Eldest Senior Brother and the others were good people. If they were alive, Qin Hao might really release Eastern Sky and Chang Yu from Palace Lord in a moment of excitement. But unfortunately, go back and don't tell anyone about me. The three demon generals won't allow it. The family members won't allow it, including your Imperial Father and Imperial Mother. Qin Hao removed the barrier and stepped out of the cave. Plop! A kneeling voice came from behind him. Imperial Lord, forgive Mo Xian for not being able to obey. If you dare to say half a word, I will have nothing to do with the Moro family from now on. Get out. Qin Hao rose up. His body flickered with light as he flew to Migres Peak. Calculating the time, it was almost half a quarter of an hour. Imperial Lord, Mo Xian's palm sank into the soil. His expression was fierce. After a long time, he gradually calmed down. With a bitter smile, he left the cave and returned to the Xintian dojo. The Moro family had to listen to the Imperial Lord. For them, Qin Hao was the ancestor of the family. Without Dendi, there would be no Moro family today. Moreover, from the tone of the conversation just now, Mo Xian also had some clues. The reason why Qin Hao fell was probably not as simple as one or two people. There must be a huge force behind it. Perhaps that force was enough to shake the entire divine wilderness continent. Although Moro was a big empire in the East Continent, it was nothing in front of the entire continent. Dina was obviously afraid of implicating them. At the Xiantian dojo, the disciples of the various peaks were still comprehending. In the vast dojo, figures were sitting on the ground. Their postures were extremely upright, and their expressions were extremely serious. At this time, Qingji Han retracted her divine sense. Her flawless face, as fair as snow, revealed a look of unfulfilled desire. Looking at the first divine soldier on the platform, she sighed. What a magical spiritual power. If I can get it, it will definitely raise my cultivation by a level and shorten the path of cultivation. Chapter 15:16. Although Lu Bingyan was one of the 3 demon generals, she was also Mo Xian's maidservant. She had accompanied him to cultivate at the Yaowang Peak, so she naturally knew that Mo Xian had left to find Qin Hao. However, she did not know what Mo Xian and Qin Hao were talking about, nor did she have the right or courage to ask. However, if Qingji Han were to ask, how would she explain? At this moment, Qingji Han was still reminiscing. She stared at the 11th divine soldier on the Tao platform with an infatuated expression. The possessiveness in her heart grew stronger and stronger. She was determined to obtain this divine soldier. However, at the same time, she also knew that Xiao Han would not give up so easily. That divine soldier would also be of great use to Xiao Han's cultivation. It all depended on who was stronger, who would be the first to conquer the artifact spirit and control the divine soldier's nomological Tao intent. It just so happened that the 7 Peaks Tao discussion was a chance for them to prove themselves. It was also the last chance for the 7 Peaks disciples to obtain the divine soldier. Once missed, it would be lost forever. After all, the 12 weapons on the Tao platform would be bestowed to the 7 Peaks' new first seat and second seat. Qin Hao was the only new disciple of the Migres Palace. No one would compete with him. Moreover, he had also grasped the nomological power of a certain divine soldier. The archer battlesuit would definitely be Qin Hao's. The other 6 peaks were different. They had many disciples. No matter which peak it was, there would be no less than 3 or 4 personal disciples. The competition would be very intense. This was especially true for the Daozong Peak. The first seat and second seat would probably be fought to the bitter end. The Daozong Peak had the most geniuses, and all of them were capable. However, Qingji Han guessed that the first seat and second seat would most likely fall to Xiao Han and Shouwuk. As for the Yaowang Peak, its personal disciples were Mo Xian, Chang Helo, and Su Jin. Mo Xian naturally wouldn't fight with her, but Chang Helo and Su Jin definitely wouldn't give up. Of course, the first princess of the East Continent was so talented that she didn't need others to give in to her. She would use her actions to prove herself. She would definitely have a part of the divine soldier on the stage. However, her opponent was Xiao Han. She had to conquer the divine soldier's artifact spirit first. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to pick a weapon that suited him. Where's Mo Xian? Only then did Qingji Han realize that Prince Moro was actually not here. Although the members of the Moro clan had always thought highly of themselves and were arrogant, they attached great importance to the cultivation of martial arts. After all, they had experienced the calamity of their country's destruction. Chapter 15:17. Miuri was not afraid of Qin Hao. At most, she was surprised for a moment. What she was truly afraid of was the terrifying existence that destroyed the Divine Palace. Perhaps that terror was still here. Anyone the 7 Peaks could be him. This person set up an illusion formation to confuse the geniuses who came to the Divine Palace. However, he would not have thought that Qin Hao's body was formed from 10,000 spirits. His eyes had the ability to see through the essence of things. Although he did not know what spell Miuri used to be able to blend in among the dead souls without being detected. However, Qin Hao could see her. How could she not be nervous at that time? He has the ability to set up arrays. Could it be? A person flashed through Qin Hao's mind. He was so shocked that he sat up from the bed. Yun Yi Peak Master. Yun Yi Perfected Lord. Was it him? Yun Yi's array skills were at the peak of perfection. He was unfathomable and could be called the #1 array master in the world. He had won Qin Hao's admiration several times. If there were suspicions, Yun Yi was the most likely. It was very likely that he had set up everything. There was no doubt that his array skills were strong. However, as a Nirvana realm cultivator, even with the help of array skills, it was not realistic to kill the other 6 peak masters and the chief in one go. Qin Hao had some understanding of the Nirvana realm. This realm was too strong. It was almost beyond life and death. It was not easy to die. Under the situation of 1 against 6, and also facing Eastern Sky, Shanghua, and Izue, this group of chief disciples with extraordinary strength, old Taoist Yun Yi's chances of victory were almost 0. Even if he had great ability, he could not kill so many people in one fell swoop. Moreover, he was not the only one in the Divine Palace who knew about arrays. Shantian Peak also knew about arrays. The old man Daozong was familiar with the 10,000 scrolls of Taoism. He must have seen through a certain level of array skills. In addition, Qin Hao's master, Tian Quan, also knew about arrays. Tian Quan was the master of the Divine Palace. Like Qin Hao, he was taught by the previous generation's 7 peak masters. He was naturally familiar with all kinds of array skills. Although Migrez had yet to unleash his full power, once he did, his power would definitely be the most terrifying of the 7 peaks. This point could be seen from Dong Tian and Qin Hao. People from the Migrez main peak had innate talent and ability that could crush their generation. All of them were unparalleled. Qin Hao's brows immediately furrowed into a ball. Analyzing from the aspect of ability and expertise, old Taoist Yun Yi was the most suspicious. But in terms of martial prowess, Migrez was the strongest in the Divine Palace. He had the best chance of killing others, not the other way around. Who could it be? Qin Hao held his head with both hands. Chapter 1518. Chantian Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Unresigned. In the following period of time, the 7 peaks began to set up the venue for the Tao discussion ceremony. The venue was still the Cloud E Peak. The elders of each peak led a portion of the disciples, and they were extremely busy. The entire Divine Palace was filled with a lively atmosphere. The 7 Peaks Tao discussion ceremony was second only to the ancestral worship ceremony. It was the handover ceremony of the 2 chief disciples, and it was extremely solemn. After that, a portion of people walked out of the Divine Palace and returned to the mortal world. Unless summoned by the Divine Palace, they were not allowed to step into the sect's sacred ground again. They were also not allowed to reveal that they had cultivated in the Divine Palace. After hundreds of years of teacher-student relationship, although the 7 peak venerables had exceedingly high cultivation and transcended the mortal world, they still couldn't help but feel sad. However, most of the disciples were still comprehending the divine soldier's rules and Tao intent at Shintian Peak. These disciples all had extraordinary talent and placed great importance on cultivation. At the critical juncture of leaving the Divine Palace, they cherished the little time they had left. The weaker disciples helped the elders set up the venue, while the outstanding ones were busy cultivating. The division of labor was clear. However, Qin Hao couldn't calm down. As the Tao discussion ceremony approached, he felt more and more uneasy, as if something was going to happen. That day, after chatting with his 2 senior brothers, he remembered Eastern Sky's wish. After that, he repeatedly went to Muri's courtyard several times, but he still couldn't sense her aura. The anxiety in his heart grew more and more restless. Finally, the day arrived. The Tao discussion ceremony was held at the Cloud E Peak. The disciples of the 7 peaks gathered at the Cloud E Peak, and no one from each peak remained. The disciples of the Shintian Dojo also stopped cultivating and dressed up to participate in the Tao discussion ceremony. On this day, there were no clouds in the sky above the divine palace, and it was as blue as water. In the void, there was a layer of divine light rippling, showing the majesty of a supreme martial arts holy land. Looking from afar, the 7 peaks of the divine palace, which reached into the clouds, were like divine palaces reaching into the sky. Cranes circled around them. It was like a scene from the mortal world. Auspicious signs, the 3 of you, translation. You 3 get dressed. As old man Migres lectured, his short figure stepped out of the Migres palace. He was dressed in an emerald green robe, and on his chest was a large chrysanthemum that bloomed in the sun.